Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
Context of white supremacy. Justice Gusty Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the world system of racism. Today's date, Wednesday, December 17th, 2014. So I have been told we are on much earlier than we normally would be. As I said down through the years, always enjoy talking to people from different parts of the planet just to get a better understanding of how things work on the planet. Thanks to all of the folks who are tuning in early. If you happen to be on your job or whatever the case may be, for our folks who are outside of the states, the people who have complained lovingly down through the years that the normal broadcast time comes on so late, for people who are in the UK or other parts of the world, you should be ecstatic because now you have a program that is airing at a time where it should be very easy for you to tune in live, so you don't have to listen to the archives. Our broadcast for today, speaking of our international listeners, I first heard about the book that we're going to discuss today a few years back, and I thought it would be great to get the author on the program. And just through the normal course of life, I got distracted. I got the book. I got a copy of the book. It's like, man, we really should try and get him on the program, and just got dislodged or what have you. I'm forgetful. But thankfully, one of our listeners in the UK, she reminded me just a few weeks back. She reminded me of the book, and she said, Gus, do you know about this book? And don't you think it would be constructive to maybe see if you could get this author on the program? And I said, absolutely. I appreciate the reminder. Take that as a signal from the universe. Reached out, and the author was willing to speak with us this evening. For folks in the UK this evening, folks in the States this morning, early afternoon. Our guest, he is a staff member in the Department of English at Durham University in Durham City. His topics of research include literature, medicine, and Renaissance studies. We'll be investigating his 2011 publication, Mummies, Cannibals, and Vampires, The History of Corpse Medicine from the Renaissance to the Victorians. Fascinating book. I would definitely encourage folks check out a copy. Reminds me of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing when she says consistently that reading is more important than watching television. There are fascinating books out there that you can read that will give you a wealth of interesting information about the world in which we live. Our guest joining us live from the UK, Dr. Richard Sugg. Dr. Sugg, are you with us?
Good evening. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Pleasure to have you on the broadcast. As I said, always great to have folks joining us from different parts of the globe. For any of our listeners anywhere in the world, this might be their first time hearing about you and the work that you've done. Anything that you think would be helpful for folks to know about you before we get started?
Yeah, I will actually be doing a second edition of the book, we hope, which is good because the book's been quite popular, and it's just been a little bit more expensive than I'd like it to be because it had to be very long. It had to detail all this material which you have gone through with some amazement perhaps, and it had to actually prove that this happened because this was so strange. But what I want to do now is make a slightly shorter version of the book, which is going to be a bit cheaper than, I think it's £28 UK price. Although, having had a very kind introduction from you in reference to books over television, I can say that it has been on television briefly as well, if that can be rummaged up from the internet. Latest research that I'm doing, people might be interested in, should be coming out this coming year, not too far in the future. And this is on vampires, but partly the more familiar vampires that people know coming out of their coffins and stalking the living in the shape of the undead. So the real vampires is the next project on the way.
Fascinating. Folks can keep an eye out for that. Just Really great info. Hopefully we can cover as much as possible. For folks that are listening in, if you have questions for Dr. Sugg as we proceed, feel free to dial in. He should be with us for about an hour or so. So do not be bashful. Get your hand up and we will snag as many questions from listeners as we can throughout the discussion. Before we get started, since as I said, we always look forward to having folks on from different parts of the world. Before we get to your material, just there's been so much unrest in the U.S. over the past few months or so with regards to racism, what happened in Ferguson, what happened with Eric Garner and Michael Brown. Have you seen any of that? Do you have any thoughts on what you've seen, if you've paid attention to that at all?
I have. It's animated people in Britain a lot, although I also have friends who lived in St. Louis, funnily enough, for quite a long time. They worked there for years, and then they moved back to work in Durham. But yeah, it's taken everybody by storm. And it struck me when I was going through this topic and some of your questions. I'll perhaps come to it individually later, but it seems to me a kind of sad example of how the powerful manage to normalize what they do, if that makes sense. What we're looking at here was hardly ever kind of complained about as cannibalism in the period, despite the fact they were denouncing the cannibals of the New World all the time. And the powerful do seem to have that strange ability to normalize the most perverse or irrational or unjust behavior.
Absolutely. I know these incidents, I have drawn parallels to what happened with Mark Duggan in 2011 in London, especially because Michael Brown Jr. was shot and killed almost 3 years to the day that Mark Duggan was shot and killed in the subsequent unrest.
Didn't realize that, yeah.
They had, in fact, they had an anniversary march almost, I think it was 2 days before Michael Brown was shot and killed that I remember playing it the day that everything started happening in St. Louis, but lots of parallels there worldwide where I've seen people saying Black Lives Matter, very relevant. At any rate, to get back to your book, I guess to kind of start off with, I thought it would be interesting to get your thoughts. We pay a lot of attention to words, and I think just the way that words are used and the etymology and history of words, I think, can reveal a lot about a certain group of people or a culture and what people put values on as it relates to your research in this book. What do you think the significance is, particularly I think in British culture in the UK, using the term bloody as an adjective to say it's a bloody good day? What do you think the use of that term bloody in that context, what does that reveal, particularly given the research that you've done?
Well, I'm told actually that it's supposed to be originally a corruption of "By My Lady," so it's actually a form of blasphemy, in fact. And it would make sense that a lot of people in Christian culture traditionally, they'd rather actually use a swear word, if you like, however kind of four-letter it might be, than use a religious curse, if you like, what they consider blasphemy. So I remember hearing a long time ago that it was a corruption of "By My Lady" being Virgin Mary, in fact. But obviously it's taken on different strains, and I suppose it's the fact that blood isn't simply good or bad, if you like, but blood is powerful for lots of reasons, whether it's to do with the force of life, whether it's to do with somebody taking your blood, spilling your blood, to do with disease and contamination. It's a very powerful thing, and I suppose in a culture in which a lot of things have become diluted, if you like, that we have so many kind of pseudo versions of sugar or fat or salt or whatever it might be, blood remains blood. It remains that kind of dense essence of life, which is not diluted in that way.
Wow. I was going to ask what prompted you to do such interesting research to get this book together. But before I do, just for folks who haven't seen you on television or are familiar with you, you are a white man. Is that correct, Dr. Sugg?
I am, yes.
Okay, right on. Now, get to my question. This is such an interesting field of research. What prompted you to explore this particular subject matter?
Thanks. Yeah, it was a long, slow process. It came out of studying anatomy, which was just being born, if you like, in the early modern period, in the 16th, 17th centuries. They were just learning to do rigorous scientific anatomy and to really look at the body and to find out a lot of the things they believed about it were wrong. At one time they believed in a kind of organ of the soul, if you like, around the bottom of the human brain. this was obviously controversial when they started anatomizing. And when you're dealing with something like that, you naturally come across other kind of visceral topics, and another one was cannibalism. Some people actually considered that anatomy was, if you like, too extreme, too much of a transgression of the human body and its sanctity and so on. And so you would occasionally see comparisons between anatomists and cannibals, that this was a kind of cannibal invasion. I think that idea of invasion and crossing sacred boundaries is interesting. And slowly I started to realize there was a lot to the subject of cannibalism. And one strange thing that was almost unknown was medicinal cannibalism. I went to a dinner party a few nights ago, and I said to somebody who's an academic in the kind of area, anthropology, where you'd expect them to have heard of this, so I've been researching medicinal cannibalism. And we'd had a few drinks before he talked to me again, and I realized he thought I said medicinal cannabis. But this is so unheard of. People don't know, what to make of it when they hear you say it. So yeah, it was a slow process finding out how much of this there had been, how much denial there was about it, and to give credit actually where it's due. I think I kind of left the subject for a while and was prompted by a student of mine, an old student, Dan, from Cardiff, who said, "Look, this is a blinding story, isn't it? This is a dynamite topic that has got in it that core of hypocrisy, that great hidden secret, if you like, secret history of the European cannibals." And in many ways that's how it's been taken, that they've been uncovered after denouncing the cannibals of Brazil or Canada or Africa for so long.
You just said that a lot of this has been denied, or a lot of people are not familiar with the history of European cannibalism. In your book, you reference this as "quote unquote" dirty history. Why is it titled as such?
Yeah, dirty history covers a lot of things, and it covers the fact that they consider this too dirty for medical history in the early 20th century. They whitewashed it over, really, and tried to deny it happened. I'll come to that in a bit. But dirty history also covers literally the fact that the past was really dirty. The past was really filthy. And ironically, we go to galleries, we go to museums to engage with the past. And I think in a quite powerful subconscious sense, we think the past smells really, really nice. The past smells like varnish, like well-cleaned wood, like galleries and museums smell like. And it didn't, of course. It stank a lot of the time. So to give you a few quick examples from the very top of society where you'd expect people to be able to be clean, to afford to be clean, have the time to do it. And of course, they didn't have to work and get dirty. Let's start with some monarchs. Elizabeth I, who's a figure in much of this history. We're told, quote, that she had a bath once a month, whether she needed it or not. Then we have James I, who makes Elizabeth I look sparkling clean. James I almost never washed any part of his body except the tips of his fingers occasionally. If you sat next to him in court, you were a courtly lady, you had a good chance of getting head lice from James. And he stank foully. You're next to this monarch and you have to pretend that you're not revolted by it. But this was a man who loved hunting so much that he would ride all day and urinate in the saddle to save the trouble of dismounting. Factor this into somebody who doesn't wash and doesn't change their clothes, I quote, until they wear out. And you start to get some sense of how filthy the top of society could be, never mind the bottom and the ranks going down.
Fascinating. Wow. I want to just read a quick passage before I get my next question in. And as you already stated, very lengthy bit of text. You have lots of footnotes, just rich with information. This is for me, it's on page 15. You write, "We must add too that royal cannibals such as Charles II, Francis I, Christian IV of Denmark, and William III were just the tip of the social iceberg. For well over 200 years in early modern Europe, the rich and the poor, the educated and the illiterate, all participated in cannibalism on a more or less routine basis. Drugs were made from Egyptian mummies and from the dried bodies of those drowned in North African desert sandstorms. Later in the era, the corpses of hanged criminals offered a new and less exotic source of human flesh. Human blood was also swallowed, sometimes fresh and hot, direct from a donor's body." I'll stop there. the term corpse medicine. It's in the title of the text, and that's something that you spent a lot of time on and talking about how widespread this was. Can you kind of give our listeners an idea of what that is, corpse medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that useful quotation. But there's much to it, so I can tell you as much as you can stomach, really. The key ingredients for this were flesh. And then if we stop at flesh for a moment, there was a key question. The question wasn't should you eat people for medicine. The question was what sort of people should you eat for medicine, and you just briefly touched on it there. So the division was between Egyptian mummies, bodies that I suppose to some people didn't seem like ordinary flesh, like ordinary bodies, were distanced, were relatively anonymous, were not bloody, didn't smell bad, and so on. And this would involve crumbling a little bit of this friable matter off the Egyptian mummy you smuggled, stolen, whatever, and putting it on a plaster which would go on a wound, putting it in a drink which you would swallow for bruising, for bleeding, and this was a big export and smuggling problem, as we find. Then the second alternative was this. This was derived from the Paracelsians, who were medical followers and iconoclasts in this period, medical terms, followers of Paracelsus, Swiss physician, very radical character, died about 1541. And his followers went in vogue for a long time into the early 17th century, and they would tell you should do this. Get hold of a young man, red hair, dead of a violent death, which was preferably hanging or drowning, not stabbing, interestingly. There's an interesting reason for this. And you should take this flesh, cut it from the thighs, the arms. You should prepare it with various spices, hang it out under the moon, more or less marinate it, or smoke it indeed. And then you could in fact prepare this into a most red tincture. So you want to be aware, if you go back in a time machine to the Renaissance, someone offers you a pleasant looking red tincture, it could be this. And it could have a very unpleasant source. But yeah, these were the two big forms of what was called mummy. So the term that applies obviously to Egyptian mummies became transferred to a hanged criminal from London or Paris or Berlin, perhaps. We've then got another big one, which is interesting: blood. Mummy cost you money, and some of these medicines could cost a lot of money. They're profitable. Whereas blood you could have fairly cheaply, and you had it like this. You stood at a scaffold at a beheading in Germany, in Scandinavia, and you held a cup. You got this cup from the executioner or his assistants. This was part of their sort of salary perks scheme, as it were, that they could sell anybody parts of the decapitated. And the moment the head was off, you either caught the blood in cups, or in some cases it was brought to you, and you drank it as fast as you could, really, almost burning hot perhaps. And then in a lot of cases you ran as fast as you could. This was actually part of the cure. You ran until you dropped. People in the Renaissance didn't run for fun. It was not a leisure activity. And this was often done for epilepsy, a disease of the soul, very taboo disease at the time. So, yeah, we have accounts from Germany up to 1865. Note the date here, the period we seem to be in, of Germany with all its gentility, its heyday of classical music and so forth. And Scandinavia, we have cases of stampedes, people camping out the night before the execution, having travelled there just to get the blood, and then almost crushing each other to death in a rush to get the blood. We have one case in Scandinavia in, I believe it's 1866, where the military is actually there forewarned to stop them getting the blood. So they push everybody back and carry off the corpse as quickly as they can. But even after this, and this is a spectacle that stuck in my mind, it's not actually in the book, it's one I found recently, and even after this, the crowd surges forward, and the people at the front stuff into their mouths the bloody earth that's been used to soak up the blood of the felon. We have a Swedish case, again, where the decapitation occurs, and two girls, about 15, 17, run through the crowd, cups in their hands, stick them under the neck, which is jetting blood, and drink the blood. And in this case, this doesn't always happen, but the police say, "What are you doing?" Police take them aside and what's going on here. And the girls say, no, look at this piece of paper. We paid the man who was executed for his blood. We paid for it. He gave his consent. And as far as we know, they were let off for this. So blood was a bit more affordable than the standard medicine, although you did also, and this is something you might want to hear a bit more about, have a character such as Masilio Ficino, big character, a huge kind of, intellectual figure in the period, had something like the status of, difficult to compare very precisely with someone like Noam Chomsky, if you like, that kind of range and reverence for his learning. And Ficino recommended, being the son of a doctor, that actually if you were old and a bit worn out, you could rejuvenate yourself by drinking blood from the arm of a living young man, and you'd presumably pay for this and do it, I suppose, fairly regularly. So we've got flesh, we've got blood. Another big one was fat, which you didn't obviously have to take into your body, although, of course, if you put it on a sore, a wound, there's likelihood you absorb it, which you could count as a form of cannibalism. So human fat was a big commodity for wounds, for sores, for gout, for rheumatism, and it survived quite a long time. It survived into the 18th century when people were starting to turn against some of the other corpse medicines. And we have tales about human fat and its sources. The executioner had the right to sell it and to prepare medicines, and the executioner did actually act as a kind of doctor to people with these body parts. We have a memorable tale, particularly from Norfolk in the southeast of England, and this is a case from 1736, so 18th century case, where husband and wife have an argument. The husband rushes out in the heat of temper, hangs himself straight away, kills himself, and the wife goes to get somebody to deal with the body, and there's a debate about, well, is he going to be buried at the crossroads? He was a suicide. The wife says, no, he's not going to be buried at all, and she fetches a surgeon, and the surgeon's patting the body all over, and the wife looks at him and says, he's fine, he's just what you want, he's as fat as butter, sells the body for its fat, for, I believe it was a guinea. Whether it was a good price or not, I suppose, would depend on the quality of the relationship. So we got flesh, blood, and fat. And another big and interesting one, which could or couldn't be cannibalistic, was the human skull. Very big commodity, and you would shave something off the human skull. I was actually asked on this television program to grate a bit of a pig's skull, and it's fairly easy to do with a cheese grater. So you get your powder of human skull. You might just put it in a drink if you were poor, and that would be your medicine. If you were rich, like Charles II, who allegedly paid £6,000 for the recipe for what was called spirit of skull, you would prepare it very precisely, skillfully in your private laboratory, and this spirit of human skull came to be known as the King's Drops because it was so closely associated with Charles II. And the other commodity you would get here, you would see skulls in a chemist, and you would think, right, that's a real skull. I'm getting a real human skull, not any substitute, so you might buy the whole skull. But you could see it in the window with moss. So this is the picture, if it's available to people, on the front of the book. And that skull has got moss on it, which will grow sometimes when a skull's left unburied. And this moss was another big commodity. It was used for bleeding, for a wound, for a nosebleed. So you take the moss, you powder it, you tip your head back, and you stick it up your nostrils. Robert Boyle swore by this, that it would stop bleeding. Robert Boyle, being, of course, the father of chemistry, is a big scientific figure, late 17th century. Earlier scientific figure, Francis Bacon, early 17th century, was a bit ambivalent about this, and he cites a wonderful recipe, which, as with many parts of this story, don't try it at home, but a recipe for wounds, and it involved moss of the human skull itself, and the fat of two bears killed in the act of generation, which I believe would be pretty hard to calculate or get. Bacon was ambivalent about whether this worked or not. I'm not sure that it works, but if you do want some human skulls, there's lots of them lying about unburied in Ireland, and that's probably enough from me for the moment, but we can talk about Ireland because it's quite an interesting topic, perhaps a bit later.
I'm putting a note down for Ireland. I remember that in the book as well, for many reasons. I just wanted to get one point, because this comes out through the book repeatedly, and I think you already mentioned it briefly, that in this practice of corpse medicine, many times it was recommended, if you could get a body, if you could get it fresh right after the person has died, and especially if the person died in a violent manner. What was so special about getting either blood or other human material from someone who died in a violent manner?
It was allegedly that he actually prepared what they called the spirits of the body, and this involves a slight detour, if you can bear with me, but they needed to link the soul to the body in their theory of medicine and their theory of theology, and they did this by a medium which was quite physical, really. It was the hottest, finest part of the blood. So I suppose if you are to cut ourselves on a cold day, we'd see what looks like, well, we'd see what we believe to be steam coming from the wound. They would consider this steam to be spirits, the spirits of the blood, and they believed that this did almost everything in the body before they understood electricity, complex chemistry, and so on. These spirits did vision, they did sexual physiology, and many other things, and they were flitting about the body faster than thought, very, very fast, and they were this link between the body and the soul, and clearly a lot of people couldn't quite separate them from the soul. I suppose a kind of continuum between body and soul existed, where these spirits were a crucial bridging point, and they blurred into the soul, if you like, for some people, and therefore they had a potency which was derived from the sanctity of the soul. The fact that the soul was in many ways a physical thing as well as a spiritual thing was important. So we're talking life force here, I suppose, and it was believed that a violent death would condition your spirits in a particularly potent way to make the body more useful, more valid as medicine, and there were arguments about the spirits being trapped inside the skull, so the skull would be the place to tap the force of these spirits of the soul.
Fascinating. Wow. As I already mentioned, you kind of write about it early in the book in terms of the value that was placed on getting these corpses, mummies from Egypt for this consumption of corpse medicine. And you spend a little bit more time on this later in the book. This is, for me, it's on page 227, chapter 3. You write, on one hand, there were those unmistakable and durable artifacts such as the pyramids, the Great Sphinx, and the Monument of Cheops. Anyone who has spent just a few moments among the most fragmentary relics of Egypt in the British Museum cannot help but wonder breathlessly at the sheer scale of a single severed arm or disembodied head. Egyptian architecture alone was enough to make some Europeans feel half-consciously insecure about their own technological powers, as when the pioneering Egyptologist John Greaves made a peculiarly tortuous effort to prove that even the greatest of the pyramids was in fact not as tall as the spire of St. Paul's, which had itself been destroyed by lightning in 1561. Rather less grudgingly, the French baron Jean Dumont, writing from Cairo in February 1691, spoke of those stately monuments which pronounced the ancient kings of Egypt the most powerful monarchs in the universe. By comparison, these magnificent sepulchres, which seemed to be copies of the Tower of Babel, how vastly inferior are the Pantheon, Colosseum, and the Capitol. Can you kind of describe how this contributes to this rampant desire to get these corpses, mummies from Egypt, and how widespread, and if this was something that was profitable and far-reaching in terms of this business to get corpses from Egypt?
Yeah, thanks for choosing that passage, because it's a very useful one. I suppose what it brings out, first of all, is a general sense of mystique, a general sense of awe about Egypt. And if you look at something like Shakespeare's Othello, the way that the handkerchief is such a crucial factor, and he says that an Egyptian Sibyl spun it out of sacred worms, sacred silkworms, and so forth. So it was always an easy choice to use dramatically, fictitiously, to impress your readers with something beyond ordinary human powers. It could blur into magic in that sense, and yeah, the sheer scale, the achievement, the durability of these incredible monuments, there was nothing like them in all the world, and even now, when we know the world better, we know that there really isn't. There was also a strange factor, which it might be forgotten, which was that people were biblically fundamental in the early modern period, and had worked out that the earth was created at, let me think now, it would have been about 6,000 years, I think, before the early modern period, and they will give you a precise day. Sometimes they'll say it was sort of 8 a.m. on a Thursday in October that God created the earth. The upshot of this was that because they'd got a pre-Darwinian notion of the scale of human evolution and so forth, Egypt was almost half as old as time itself, as the actual world, never mind humanity. And in some calculations, because it depended how you calculated the age of Egyptian antiquities, Egypt was actually older than the earth. So you can see how this kind of awed them as well. And as you say, they were kind of insecure and trying to prove that their monuments were actually bigger than the pyramids. So, yeah, had a special status, Egypt, in people's minds. And they were smuggling vigorously, as well as trading perhaps sometimes. 1586, Shakespeare's time, John Sanderson from Britain managed to get over 600 pounds weight of mummies, which I imagine would be quite a lot of mummies. I think they're terribly heavy given their dryness. And sand mummies, as you touched on briefly, sand mummies were people who were recent corpses. They would be overwhelmed in sandstorms when they try and navigate the Egyptian deserts for trade purposes, and their bodies would dry out perfectly, preserve perfectly, not rot, and be very, very light as well in this climate. So you had various sources. Nonetheless, the Egyptian authorities presently managed to clamp down a little bit on the smuggling, the stealing of mummies and other artifacts as well from the pyramids and the tombs. And when this happened, you had a big trade in fraudulent substitutes, and you hear these stories about people in dirty backrooms in Alexandria manufacturing supposed mummy from the flesh of dead lepers, beggars, camels, using various spices and treatments and baking to disguise what they're producing and selling it on for a handsome profit.
Wow, fascinating. Again, Lee Cowles, our guest joining us live from the UK, Dr. Richard Sugg. Great book, would recommend folks pick up a copy. We've touched on how this was widespread. It would be incorrect to think that this was something that was just ignorant people or poor people that were doing this. This is just some hack practice that was going on in terms of corpse medicine and consumption of human flesh for various reasons. You also talk about how this went on for so long that eventually you have Christianity, the rise of Christianity as a more powerful force, where more people are practicing this and involved in this, that even the evolution and popularity of Christianity did not necessarily prohibit this practice of corpse medicine, cannibalism, consumption of human flesh. Is that accurate, and why you think the two were not incompatible?
That is accurate, and in fact the two in some ways were very compatible. And all of what you said is very to the point, that people will try and pass off these things as just barbaric, common superstition of the uneducated, which was nonsense because they couldn't afford a lot of these medicines at all. And there was a lot of educated theory backing these things up. A lot of the time, however much you tell people that this is a 17th century phenomenon into the 18th century, they will brand it medieval. You know, that Quentin Tarantino use of kind of medieval, I suppose. And it wasn't. It didn't get going in its full force and sweep until the 16th and the 17th centuries. And it's probably at its height, interestingly, to take another kind of strand of, big canonical culture. It was at its height during the start of the scientific revolution. So with people like Robert Boyle, the age of people like Hooke and Newton, and all these great scientists and anatomists. So it's been distorted in its real history in lots of ways. And Christianity was by no means incompatible with it. I was supposed to give you, if you like, a kind of precise, local, memorable example. We have a man, you probably remember from the book, called John Keogh, a minister in Southern Ireland. And Keogh, very respectable, ministerial, genteel, early modern family. He was married to, I think, a countess or someone of rank. And Keogh, if you asked him, and he would dispense medical services because men of the cloth did this for people in those days. They were looked up to in that way. he would recommend you almost any part of the human body, including excrement, menstrual blood, and matter scraped from the inside of a chamber pot. And there was virtually nothing that Keogh couldn't treat. One of his particularly impressive recommendations was for people suffering from flatulence or I think it was nervous pains of the joints. They should wear gloves, but the gloves should be made of human skin. So we've got a very Christian figure there doing what looks like some quite unchristian things in Southern Ireland in the 18th century, quite late on. The other general point about Christianity and corpse medicine is that in many ways it encouraged it. And this brings us back to the soul and these spirits that were supposedly trapped by a violent death in a very agitated form in the skull, say. All of those little details which seem kind of bizarre now about the Paracelsian subject for your corpse medicine, that he was red-haired, he was young, perhaps about 24, died of a violent death, and he didn't hemorrhage. All these things are actually important. So, in terms of his age, there was a belief that you had a foreordained lifespan, that he was cut off long before that lifespan, and you were actually using, in a strange but real sense, all the potency of the life that he'd been denied. He had red hair, so because he had red hair, as you've perhaps seen a lot of superstition about red-haired people in the past, he was believed to have a special kind of blood, so the blood was specially suitable, blood being the carrier of the spirits, arguably the carrier of the soul, and of course popular at these executions. And he hadn't hemorrhaged, so he hadn't lost the blood, he hadn't lost the spirits. All of this was kind of trapped, not just in the blood vessels, but in the matter and tissue of the flesh. So belief in the soul as the absolute essence of the human being, the link between humans and God, but yet something that was really in the body. They were constantly saying, was it in the heart, was it in the brain, was it in the stomach, was it moving between the heart and the brain? This quite physical soul, this physiologically embedded soul, underpinned corpse medicine. And if you like, to put it polemically, you wouldn't eat an animal body because animal body wasn't worth eating. It hadn't got an immortal soul as far as they were concerned. So, yeah, this is one of the big points about Christianity. You could also add that Christianity caused a fair deal of violent cannibalism amongst Protestants and Catholics as the Christian world was split down the middle by the Reformation, and the wars of religion tore Europe to pieces. The barbarity of these wars has been forgotten, I think, but estimates range to as much as a third of the population of continental Europe being decimated across this period up to about 1648. And famine cannibalism occurred because people were starving and literally ate their neighbours, their children, and so forth during these wars. But also what's known as exo-cannibalism, deliberately violent cannibalism, tends to be associated with tribal cannibals who by no means only practice that. But this aggressive cannibalism to deride your enemies, to shame them, to invade them in the most extreme degree, occurred between Protestants and Catholics. They literally ate their enemies over a fire, on a pike perhaps. And in Auxerre, in France, there was a Protestant who was killed by the Catholics, and they literally auctioned off his heart, and the winner put it on a grill and ate it.
Man, lots of those type of grisly details in the book, and he gives lots of information on what he just laid out in terms of Christianity being used to foster a lot of this cannibalistic behavior. Before I get some of the folks that dial in, I definitely want to bring this up because I hope at least people that listen to this program take all this information, and now so you hold that in one hand, and then you have all of these images that even continues into the 21st century where Europeans, white people, have branded Africans and other indigenous non-white populations all over the world as savages and cannibals, and they even got a lot of cartoons with Bugs Bunny and what have you, where it's got some black person with a bone in their nose, and they're snatching a white person, they're putting them in a big black pot, and they're going to cook them and eat them. And that's used many times to justify the practice of racism. And you have in your book, this is chapter 4, page 368, you write, once labeled in this way as a cannibal and effectively dehumanized tribal peoples in the Americas, Africa, and Australia Australasia could be legitimately civilized, colonized, or outrightly destroyed, there is little doubt that cannibalism was both a political tool and a dangerously unstable fantasy in the minds of European Christians during the decades that followed Christopher Columbus's momentous landing. Cannibals were deliberately invented or imagined without justification. Can you kind of reconcile this major bit of hypocrisy where Europeans are branding these folks that they say are uncivilized and deserving of being colonized, or sometimes just out and out genocide against these folks, when they are practicing the exact same thing? Sometimes some folks might even say worse.
I can do so only partially, to be honest. We come back to the point that we were discussing at the beginning, that the powerful normalize their hypocrisy, they normalize their injustice, their violence, and so forth. I can't reconcile the contradiction between the British Empire as the richest country in the world in the 1880s and an average of 44 people a year starving to death in London in the midst of all that wealth, or the fact that the worst slums of the East End in London in that period for rent cost you per cubic foot up to 12 times as much as an apartment in Mayfair. I can't entirely reconcile the fact that we have insane amounts of global warming and catastrophes related thereto, and the biggest cars the world has ever seen getting no less popular. But to come back to the central points there in this precise topic, it was convenient for them to believe in cannibalism, as you rightly said, partly because they could enslave cannibals. The Spanish were particularly big on this, and the Spanish allegedly performed one of the very worst genocides the world has ever seen in South America when they first got to the New World. And it was also convenient in a very Christian sense for the Protestants as well to believe that they could rescue the good Americans from the bad Americans, that the cannibals were the irredeemable other, if you like, the irredeemable savage. But there was a great kind of colonial drive early on in lots of countries to make this look an attractive place to live, to go. It was hard to do this. It was hard to sell the project early on. And one of the things you would do was appeal to evangelism. So one of the very first evangelical sermons was preached by John Donne in 1622. And Donne is very big on the fact that you must save these people's souls, that you must save them for Christianity. And there was often a sense, explicit or otherwise, of saving them from the cannibals, the really evil, irredeemable Native Americans. To try and technically reconcile the kind of oppositions of this impossible equation a little bit more, one interesting detail which we think the Europeans used when they were engaged in medicinal cannibalism, they gave medicine a special kind of status, which I think is interesting in that medicine's often got that kind of status. It obliges us to accept things, if we're doctors, sometimes to behave in ways that ordinary people wouldn't. And medicine had this special status, summed up nicely by a character called Fuller in the mid-17th century. And Fuller said that mummy was, quote, good physic but bad food, good physic but bad food. So very explicitly there, in just 5 words, the sense that this is good as medicine, but you don't eat it. You're not eating it. And he doesn't elaborate on this as much as we'd like, but you get the sense that they were kind of kidding themselves, that they weren't eating human matter or swallowing human matter in the same way that the cannibals were. And I would say that they were, in fact, there's no question about it. One little detail that's also interesting in the late 17th century, when you look at the drama, as you rightly said, if you look carefully at words, you get some interesting results. And over again, in the drama of the period, these very kind of light-hearted comedies a lot of the time in Charles II's period and onwards, you get a phrase about someone being beaten, and nowadays we'd say, I'm going to beat you to jelly, I'm going to beat you to a jelly, and so forth. They would say, I'm going to beat you into mummy, or he's going to beat me into mummy. And this is interesting because what it seems to reveal when you decode it is that physicians' practice with mummy was starting to be seen as degraded by the general public, by a popular audience, that there was this sense of violence. You're doing violence to nature, you're doing violence to the human body, perhaps you're doing violence to your patients who you're making swallow this. In some cases, people were possibly swallowing this medicine without knowing it. The doctor was kind of taking an executive decision, if you like. So against the kind of very elevated alchemy of the soul that we see with these spirits of the body, the spirits of the soul. We have this beating into mummy, creeping in as the 17th century wears on. So, yeah, these are some of the strands to try and knot together in this strange puzzle.
The cows, again, our guest, Dr. Richard Sugg. See folks that dialed in and have hands up. We'll see if we can get some questions from our listeners. Again, don't be bashful. Get your hand up if you have a question you would like to ask. Dr. Sugg, our caller at 0586. Did you have a question for Dr. Sugg? Your line should be open.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Hi, welcome, Dr. Stubbs. Hello, nice to you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, you're very welcome. Some of the, I guess, the nectar that you just mentioned, what was and I might have missed this, but what was the time frame of all these occurrences and also, or time span, and also where exactly did this take place, like in what part of Europe?
Yeah, that's a couple of good questions. The time frame is roughly 16th century to mid-18th century, extending the later period into the late 19th century if you're talking about the blood being taken at scaffolds. If you just limit it to Britain, you get things cutting off around the middle of the 18th century. They turn against these horrid medicines, as they call them then. But you find the poor in Bradford, in the north of England, in London, just managing to get hold of a skull from somewhere and grating a little bit for medicine for a child that's perhaps sick with convulsions or epilepsy. The other point about geography is it seems to be limited to some extent to the north of Europe. That it went on in France, but it doesn't seem to have gone on very much in Italy. It doesn't seem to have gone on a huge amount in Spain. So you're mainly talking France, Britain, these northern countries such as Scandinavia, Austria, and Germanic countries. And this has been argued, interestingly, to be because there was a belief in what's called the animate corpse, that a body didn't simply die like us switching off a light. It lingered on with some degree of vitality for set periods. The longest period was up to about a year after it was, given its funeral, as it were. And there was a kind of interim period of about 3 days where it had a particularly strong amount of vitality in it. And if you look at the biblical story of Lazarus, this is a big deal that Christ raises Lazarus because Martha says, "But Lord, he's been dead 4 days." And that meant something in the New Testament period, and it continued to mean something in the early modern Christian world. And also, this is another story, but it means something in vampire culture as well.
Wow. Oh, great. Okay. And then the last two questions are, is it true that, and you might have mentioned this as you were speaking, but is it true that that some people would go around licking the sores of others?
Yeah, you're right. This was, as far as we know, more of a medieval phenomenon. But yeah, there was a famous saintly character who, as part of her, I suppose, kind of saintly Christian self-abnegation, would actually swallow matter from the sores of another nun who was dying of cancer, and the smell was supposed to be so bad that people wouldn't even come near the body normally, and yet this was a cracking example of mind over matter, but very much Christian mind over matter, I suppose. And an awful lot of that is big in this topic, that you manage to accept what we consider degrees of filth, discomfort, and repugnance because you make them mean something very different in your mind.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then the last question is, do you know if there's any pattern of this continuing today in some parts of the European continent?
Not Europe so much as other parts of the world. The story that I saw a little while ago was, and I think it was actually true, this was about 2 or 3 years ago, Korean baby capsule scandal, where there was a belief in powdered matter from babies that I imagine have been stillborn being used perhaps as a potency aid rather than a typical medical cure, as it were. And that's the most striking example I've seen. But it went on late in European culture among the poor. It would be surprising if I think there weren't some examples in the early 20th century in Europe.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. This is very, very interesting. I'm learning a lot. Thank you, Dr. Suggs. Thank you, Gus.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. The caller that dialed in, I guess you're on the flash phone. Did you have a question for Dr. Sugg? Your line should be open.
Greetings, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, Dr. Sugg.
Evening.
I have a couple of questions. I remember coming across in a Dutch dating practice where they would they would get dressed up and they would go to public autopsies. Have you come across that information on couples going to public autopsies in England or in Dutch culture?
Yeah, is this what you're describing? Something of a fetish, maybe, by the sound of it?
Oh, okay. You haven't really. Oh, okay, I was just wondering if you. Yeah, I've been trying to look for find it again. I haven't really been able to find it. Seems like it's kind of hidden. I do have another question. This animated corpse concept. Do we have a name? Do we know that who came up with that concept?
Yeah, it's as far as I know, it's a scholar called Catherine Park. Catherine Park discussed this and said that it was peculiar to the north of Europe. But I think probably the peculiarity about the north of Europe is perhaps limited to the educated classes that looking at vampires, as I've been doing for the last few years now, you find that there's a very, very powerful belief in an animate corpse in a lot of traditional culture in Greece, in Serbia, Hungary, Russia, Poland, and a lot of traditional vampire cultures. The person's not really dead until about 3 days after the funeral, the actual kind of legal death occurs, if you like. And this is taken so seriously that in some Romanian funerals, they would take the corpse to the church and the burial in an open coffin, quote, so that it could see and hear what was going on. So animate corpse is a big and fascinating, wide-ranging topic.
I remember reading something, like, I know, not remember, but I know Herodotus. You probably heard jokes about people saying that they're drinking out of their, out of skulls of their ancestors or their grandmothers or something like that. I know Herodotus wrote about skulls made of, cups made of skulls. So I guess that's pretty, that's something that,
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned skulls. You're right. I think there were actually sometimes kind of pious funeral rituals that the Scythians, a long time ago, were supposed to have had a ritual like this, where they would keep their father's skull and they would gild it and so forth, and they would have a funeral ritual where they would drink out of his skull once a year, perhaps as a commemoration. It was possibly, in their view, quite pious. But of course, a lot of these images of skulls have been used to demonize African cultures and New World cultures at different periods. And one that comes to a lot of people's minds, I think, perhaps is Heart of Darkness, with Kurtz there and skulls around his heart in Conrad's novel. And this, in a way, is just a distillation of lots of other kind of images of these pseudo tribes that never really existed, probably defined by their treatment of human skulls. This is ironic because when we touched on Ireland, the thing that was lingering in my mind was a character called Humphrey Gilbert who terrorized the Irish into submission in Queen Elizabeth's time. And Gilbert would make any Irish supplicants, if you like, any people asking for some kind of mercy or clemency or whatever it was, come to his tent, and they would walk along a path, and this path would look to have a kind of rockery border, if you like, from a distance. In fact, the path was formed on its two sides of skulls, or heads, depending how old they were, of people that Gilbert had recently slain. And Gilbert typically slew everybody, men, women, and children in a given village, which was one reason why there were so many skulls available in Ireland. There were so many skulls available in Ireland, apparently into the 18th century, that the English actually had an import duty on human skulls taken from Ireland for medical purposes until about 1770 something.
Did that answer your question, 909?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I had my phone muted. I just wanted to thank you, Gus. I've had a hard time formulating questions. I thought I was thinking of some, but just the topic it's got my mind kind of rolling. I was wondering, Dr. Smook, have you come across any type of writing where these? I'm curious about serial killers, because it seems some of those areas where you found information, are serial killers prominent in those areas? And I had another question: have you come across any writings where these Europeans talk about being fundamentally lacking in some type of vitality? I'm curious on. I'm gonna read your book. I'm just curious on like the real reasons why this stuff is going on.
Yeah, thanks for touching on the serial killer side, because that isn't in this book, but it's something I've just been writing about for the vampire book. People who did actually drink blood, and there are an alarming number of these people. Sometimes they just kind of coded themselves as vampires, and they would drink one another's blood in a vampire cult, for example. Rod Ferrell is one you might remember from. It was Florida, I believe, where the murders occurred in, I think it was 98. And Ferrell, as far as I know, is still in jail for these murders. He escaped the death sentence. But he certainly thought of himself as a vampire, and he and his friends drank one another's blood. There've been a pretty appalling number of murders where the victim's blood has been drunk, sometimes in quite kind of elaborate ways, if you like, blended up in a blender with Coca-Cola and so forth. And one of these cases, it's funny you mentioned the vitality, because there was a character who was clearly psychotic. He was an American serial killer, and he believed that he had some kind of withering condition, and he needed to drink blood to actually cure this condition. In terms of the corpse medicine and the vitality, I suppose that the best example is this recommendation to drink the blood of a living person. And if you think about what a big metaphor that's been for transgression of all basic human rights, that you don't drink somebody else's blood, that a vampire is an oppressor who, drinks the blood of the living, whether it's tenants who can't afford the rent or factory workers that can't live in those conditions and so forth, and they feed from the living. This is the point about a vampire. Sophie Chino, on whom we touched, a big authoritative intellectual, recommended that you drink blood if you are aged from young, healthy people directly from their arms.
Appreciate that, 909. I had one other question I wanted to get in. If I see somebody dial in that can get their hand up quickly, I'll see if we have time to get their question in as well. Since you brought up the serial killer aspect and a continuation, I know people that listen to this broadcast definitely should be familiar with Kendrick Johnson. This is a black male. He was 17. He was found mysteriously dead in a gym mat down in Georgia. This happened in 2013, unless I'm in error. And very suspicious circumstances. The family is not satisfied with what the police have told them, and this is ongoing even right now in terms of trying to investigate and get more information about how this child died at school. But one of the interesting aspects that just further adds to the horror around all of this is that after the autopsy was done, it was discovered that his organs had been removed and replaced with newspaper. This was widely reported. CNN and many other major news outlets picked this up. Also, folks who are familiar with Lennon Lacy, black male, also 17, who died under suspicious circumstances. They ruled it a suicide. He was found hanging in North Carolina. This was just a few months ago. And his grave was dug up after he was buried. This also under suspicious circumstances and still being investigated. I'm also reminded, since we mentioned serial killers, in terms of Jeffrey Dahmer, the white male, he ate and killed approximately 17 people, most of them black males. I think all of them except for, I think, one, non-white males, that this went on for a long, long time. We've done programs talking about Mr. Dahmer. Do you see instances where this corpse medicine and this cannibalizing the humans, particularly some of the aspects you talked about, individuals that are already being degraded and not seen as being human, do you see any continuation of that, and particularly the way that whites have treated black people with some of the castrations and lynchings where bodies were dismembered, penis was castrated, and the sort of things that were happening, even things that are happening right now, 21st century, some of the cases that I just mentioned? Do you see a continuance of this practice?
I think, there's two elements to this topic. One is that kind of absolute degradation of the other, if you like, that you're trying to assert your superiority, your hatred, whatever it might be, by the way you treat the body and the invasion of the body, the invasion of kind of fundamental parts of the body. Particularly, it's interesting that Europeans did this to each other, and the most aristocratic Europeans, the more aristocratic you were, the more kind of violent sense of honor you had, and the more you defended that sense of honor by attacks similar to the ones you're describing. I mean, Italian aristocrat dragging another Italian aristocrat around the square at the back of a horse, if you know nothing about the dragging deaths that occurred with cars instead in America. The body being dismembered, somebody gnawing on the liver while it's probably still hot, and this person's palace being destroyed in front of their eyes before they die. These kind of attacks would also involve castrations as well, and a kind of sort of mimicry of cannibalism with that gnawing on the organs. So that kind of attack is one thing, but you can see parallels with cannibalism and that absolute invasion, that absolute kind of marker of otherness. The other one's a bit more complicated but very interesting, and it goes back to the early modern period when the Spanish were decimating the New World populations in this horrible genocide, which really does seem to have occurred. One of the things they were supposed to have done was murder some of the Native Americans for their fat in South America, because the fat, as we touched on before, was used to treat wounds and sores. And interestingly, if you're in a culture where you don't understand the local fauna very much, it's a very different world to you, one constant factor might be the human body. So you have these human bodies with human fat, you can treat your sores without other medicines, and allegedly the Spanish did this. The Native Indians believed they would be murdered for their fat by the Spanish. It's argued that from this there arose a very peculiar demon which still exists in the Andes in Bolivia and Peru to this day as we speak. This demon is called sometimes the Pistaco, sometimes the Caraciri, depending on what part of the Andes you're in. And it will be often a real living person, an actual person can be scapegoated as one of these demons. But the point about the demon is it's a kind of vampire that kills you magically by stealing your fat. And it's alleged to sell this fat on to industries for industrial purposes or to medicine. And this has stuck, and it seems to me is a version of a very powerful myth, which I think often, most of the time, almost all the time, is just a myth. It isn't actually true, but it means something. And the similar case you see in Central America, taken very seriously in Guatemala and other places, is that North Americans will steal your children, or perhaps adults as well, but children are a particularly kind of spark point of this belief, for their organs, for their eyes, for their kidneys, and they will take them for transplants to North America for rich people to receive transplants. And none of these things have ever been proved. They're very detailed, but they actually do look mythic. The interesting and real thing about them, I think, is that they encode a sense of what the powerful mean to these minority cultures or oppressed cultures, whether it's the Indians in 16th century or the Central Americans in the present day. And all of these people believe there is nothing that the powerful will not do to us, and that includes using us for medicine. This is a very, very powerful motif across history, across cultures. Whenever somebody has been oppressed to an intolerable degree, this belief will come about that this is what the powerful will do to you. They will stop at nothing.
I hope folks were paying attention acutely to that response. Before you exit, I had to get in just because of the popularity. I think if it's not the most popular television program here, it's definitely top three. The Walking Dead, which is all about zombies and eating flesh. And I mean, it gets extremely graphic where they're literally eating eyeballs and fingers and, anything you can imagine goes down on this program all the time, as well as all of the vampire movies. And it's not even just Walking Dead. There's so many vampire movies, Night of the Living Dead, and they just keep getting remade and recycled. Some folks would submit, hey, this seems to be an important aspect of European white culture because it is so pervasive throughout literature. You have all these books on vampires and mummies and eating flesh and all that, and in movies and TV programs, that it seems to be a really powerful motif that this is so reoccurrent and so popular. Not that it's just out there, but it's out there and supremely well watched and promoted. What does this signify about white European culture?
I suppose one thing it signifies is that we're fascinated with death, and we want to try and handle death in a space that's a bit more fantastical, a bit more safe, a bit more comfortable, and that these figures, both of them, you're right, they seem to rival each other for the most popular demon of fantasy or horror fiction. The zombie and the vampire both straddle the world between the living and the dead in this peculiarly uncanny kind of way. So I think it's another attempt to engage with death and to deal with death in perhaps safe kind of forums and safe little bite-sized, if I can use an unfortunate phrase, pieces. Another fascinating thing to me about the vampire particularly, which has been my preoccupation for a few years now, the vampire cultures that I've examined, these people were scared to death of vampires. They were literally scared to death. They actually died of what's known, this is an anthropological phrase, voodoo death, where if you believe that somebody can kill you, you will actually die of that fear. This is attested and has a quite precise pattern. It tends to occur in between 1 to 3 days with a general kind of shutdown and a refusal of food and water. So these vampire victims believed that a vampire had come to them in the night, and they would die of terror. And a lot of the things that these vampire cultures did look very strange. They would stake living people, they would cut the heads off their dead relatives, they would drink the ashes of a vampire's corpse. So actually, if you do want some very recent cannibalism, then go to Romania in the 21st century and you can find people drinking vampires' ashes. I'd call that cannibalism. But as strange as the vampire cultures look to us, we would to them look screaming mad that we pay staggering amounts of money, we take staggering amounts of trouble to conjure these terrors into our homes. What is wrong with us? I think it's again an example of something that's been normalized so much that we don't really think about it very hard. But to a Martian or some Serbian from a vampire-terrified village of the 18th century, we would look quite crazy, actually. The other thing I find fascinating about the zombie and the vampire is that sense of rivalry, I suppose. And, I think nobody quite knows for sure who's the most popular. You can imagine putting the two in a boxing ring and scrapping it out, and who would win. I don't think either has a weight advantage, but there's something about the popular coding of the zombie and the vampire, that the vampire has a bit of personality, that it has some intention, that it has a kind of evil stylishness, whereas the zombie is a lumbering kind of automaton. It doesn't have any kind of gourmet qualities. It isn't going to ask you for a menu before it sinks its teeth into your flesh and rends it apart as we're watching on TV at the moment. So yeah, two endlessly fascinating figures that never seem to lose their popularity. I lose track of the number of films on these two.
I would agree. I would encourage folks to check out some of Dr. Suggs, some of your other material. Excellent report. The Trade in Human Organs, Return of the Body Snatchers. This is published in 2011. Some of you, as well as the book that we have discussed today, just lots of information. Couldn't cover everything in the program, but hopefully will pique your interest to do a little more research. When is the latest material? You said you're also doing a book that's coming out on vampires. Is that coming out sometime soon?
Yeah, I hope it's going to come out in probably autumn of 2015. I'm very keen to get a trade publisher for this book, bearing in mind that the earlier book was quite expensive. I'd like this to be a genuinely popular book, an accessible book, and a good trade publisher I think will keep the price down. We'll make sure this can reach out to a big audience, which I hope it will have. So yeah, it should be coming. Perhaps around about Halloween would be ideal next year.
Fitting. Right on. Before I let you go, I definitely got to make sure I get this in. This is on 403 where you were talking about former George Bush. George Bush the second time around, George H. Bush. This is on 403
Sure.
of the book where you write, and you're talking about how we can dehumanize other people when we get into this kind of us and we sort of thing. And you were us and them sort of thing, where you said, myself am occasionally aware that I have had this kind of attitude towards George Bush and the strange assemblage of creatures who once voted him back into power. I did not want to eat them. I am a vegetarian and mindful of my health, but I did have a considerable difficulty in persuading myself that they were quite real, that they were complex, three-dimensional beings who believed in themselves quite as vigorously as I do. And I read that and I said, now, come on now, Dr. Sugg, I feel like people do that pretty frequently in terms of viewing George Bush's behavior with the war in Iraq and going and pursuing this military adventure, killing a lot of people, and saying that what he did is an anomaly. And I just say, come on now, we can go all the way back, we can look at the history of the British Empire, we can look at the behavior of the United States and France during Vietnam, we can even look at Margaret Thatcher and her labeling Nelson Mandela a terrorist for his efforts to overthrow apartheid. That this behavior is pretty consistent. I don't really see anything that George Bush did as being that different or that much of a deviation from what I have seen pretty consistently from white people in power around the world. Am I talking crazy?
You're not, sadly, you're not at all. It's been a very sad history, very similar, and very much backed up by Christian morals a lot of the time, driven by Christian ideology or with a kind of Christian coating over the top of it. It's too grimly familiar. I suppose the technology and the ability has become more powerful, which is regrettable, but what people would do to one another in the 17th century, as I said, Protestants and Catholics would literally eat one another for ideological rage, if you like.
Right on. I wanted to make sure I got that in as well. Not that I'm a fan of George Bush, but just can't really say that he's that much of a deviation from anything that I'm accustomed to seeing on the planet. Again, the book Mummies, Cannibals, and Vampires, published in 2011. It is a weighty book, but it has lots of fascinating tidbits. You got to hear quite a bit on the program today. Very much appreciate you spending a bit of your evening with us, Dr. Sugg. We will be looking forward to the book on vampires coming up in autumn of 2015. And again, just want to thank you for sharing some of your time and expertise with us this evening.
Thank you. It's been a really great interview, really enjoyable. Thank you for fixing it up and for the questions.
Absolutely. I didn't look at my switchboard. We had one other caller with a question. Do you have time for one more question from a caller?
That's fine. Just one more is fine. Thank you. Yeah.
For sure. My apologies. Mr. Demry 4 did see your hand. Did you have a question for Dr. Sugg before he departs? Mr. Demry 4, you there, sir? Did you have a question?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry for tuning in late. My question is concerning the series of movies that I'll call Hostel, and I think it's 1, 2, maybe 3 of them, where in Europe, vacationing people find themselves drugged and their body parts missing. Is it any truth to that premise that the movie was based on?
Could you remind me of the name of the film again? So the line's a little bit unclear. Just the name of the film.
Okay. Could you relay that to him, Gus? It's Hostel.
Hostel.
I've got it now. Thanks. I know the film. Yeah. It's interesting that there's another film which you might know. It's a good one. I think it's British, by Stephen Frears, called Dirty Pretty Things, which takes this as its premise in London, that people are found in a bathtub full of ice with a telephone beside them, and they're told, call this number because you've just lost your kidney. That this is a kind of peculiar medical abuse, which isn't a murder. You survive, but you lose one of your organs. As far as I know, this hasn't been proven in very many cases. There's a lot of reports of this all across the world. And as was said before, it a lot of the time seems to have a different kind of truth to it, and an important truth, which is that people have come to believe, under systems of oppression, that there is nothing the powerful will not do to us, and this includes taking our organs. It's not always the powerful. It's sometimes an attractive woman who seduces you in a bar, buys you a drink, you're drugged, you wake up without your kidney, whatever it might be. The one case that I'd recommend looking into, if you have time, is in Kosovo. I think this is still being investigated by international courts, where a character called Yusuf Sonmay, I think he was a Turkish surgeon, he became known as Dr. Vampire or Dr. Vulture on the basis that he was accused of running an illegal organ ring in which people were perhaps actually murdered specifically for their organs, being shot in deliberate ways not to damage the organs that were required, and that large amounts of money were changing hands for this in Kosovo a few years ago. This is still a subject of investigation as far as I know, but it bears looking into.
Fascinating. Did that answer?
Okay, thank you very much for answering my question, and thanks for dropping by the program. Thanks for taking the call, guys.
Glad we could get you in. Thank you, gentlemen, and a scholar. Dr. Sugg, appreciate you hanging in to get that extra question. Again, thank you so much for sharing your time, and we will be on the lookout for future scholarship from you. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening, Dr. Sugg.
Many thanks. Hope we can talk again. Thanks.
Absolutely. Take care.
Good night.
Good night, sir. The cows, fascinating. I'm going to see if I can get my hands on the article that I shared that he also authored, The Trade in Human Organs, Return of the Body Snatchers. That's another movie as well. See if I can get my hands on that. This is from 2011 that this issue came out. If I am able to put my hands on it before we go off air, I'll post it on Facebook. I can, I guess, take this moment to give a shout out one of our listeners, longtime listeners, who has helped in a myriad of different ways in getting the program on the air and what have you. But she helps me out getting access to some university libraries because they always have just wonderful resources and materials. Just always a hoot to be able to go and dig through their archives to see all the goodies that they have. But if I can put my hands on it, I will share so that other folks can benefit as well. With that in mind, I just want people to keep, number one, Henrietta Lacks. We've been reading The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks in terms of white people stealing genetic material and some of the assertions that were made throughout the book from the different black people talking about I don't even want to say rumors, but the allegations that John Hopkins and or other white people were stealing black children and or black people, period, and doing experiments on them, doing research on them, taking their organs, that has come up repeatedly, and why many of the black people had skepticism about going to the doctor because they did not trust that white people would do the correct thing, that they might go to the hospital and leave without everything that they had when they entered the hospital, and not by their own choosing. That for one. Again, Kendrick Johnson. This is not something that we're talking about from 100 years ago, 50 years ago. This is something that happened 2013. I mean, just heinous atrocity piled on top of one another. Not only his death under suspicious circumstances where that still has not been adequately explained, and then his organs being missing. And this is not just some wild-eyed conspiracy theory. This is documented. As I said, CNN reported this and had this on the front page where his organs are missing and been replaced with newspaper. And nobody can give an adequate explanation for that either. And I think there were some of the same allegations around Trayvon Martin, just to kind of keep that in mind. I'll get the sound clip in. This is from Hidden Colors 3, where you hear a myriad of people just kind of giving more information that I think you should just kind of hold everything that you just heard from Dr. Sugg, hold that in one hand and then have this in the other. We'll get the clip in, and then if folks have anything that they'd like to share from what they heard from Dr. Sugg, we can make time for that as well. But this is from Hidden Colors 3, and just talking about the ongoing practice of white people, cannibalism, organ harvesting, 21st century.
Body parts. They've been selling body parts. That's old. That's not new. That's why black people don't like to go to hospitals. They go to get their toes clipped, their fingernails clipped, and they wake up and their foot's gone.
They've been utilizing the organs of black people for years, the organs and the body parts and the members of African American people, and that goes back to George Washington. There's a long time myth that George Washington had wooden teeth. We've heard that myth growing up in school. The reality is George Washington did not have wooden teeth, because common sense will tell you you can't put wood in your mouth, it gets wet, and wet wood is useless. What George Washington did, he had the teeth of his African slaves yanked out of their mouths, and he made dentures out of these teeth, and they're on display. His dentures are on display at museums right now. And that just goes to show the history of African people having our bodies mutilated and our members disfigured and mutilated for the betterment and benefit of the dominant society.
In America, at least 2,500 black people go missing every year. At least. Never to be found again, not killed enough, you just don't find them again. Why doesn't that number ever go down? How can you constantly have the same amount of people? Are you trying to say the same killers go out and murder the same amount of people every year? No. Somebody is taking black people off the street. There's been stories on this. Kidnapped by the government. Kidnapped by organ traffickers.
Drive-by shootings is organ stealing.
I'm worth $50 million and I need a kidney. And you know, kidneys are pretty sensitive. You got to find somebody who really got the kidney that matches yours. You think I'm going to wait till somebody die for me to get one? If I don't get one soon, I'm going to die. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to pay somebody to go research people. Okay, let's go look at all the black organ donors. Let's look at all the black people who got organ donor on their driver's license, which is why I'm not a friend of that. I say, if you want to donate your organs, put it in your will. Say that if I die, this can go to my family, my relatives, my friends, or whomever. But when you put it on your license, I believe you make yourself a public target. And so what did they find? We got a guy in Los Angeles. He has the same blood type as you, same kidney type as you likely. He healthy though. He ain't likely to die no time soon. He don't know you, so he ain't going to give you no organ for free. So guess what we're going to do? We're going to arrange a murder that makes it look like he was in a car accident. We're going to arrange a murder that makes it look like he committed suicide. So the next thing you know, you coming out the gas station, boom, you get hit by a Mack truck. You dead, gone. You get taken to the funeral home. Your family come to the funeral. They don't know that before your body got laid to rest, a little hole was poked and they pulled your kidney out.
Context of white supremacy, modern day corpse medicine. I would not minimize that, take that lightly. And it's not to scare people or what have you. It's just, hey, this is what it is. This is the system of racism, white supremacy. It's well documented, undeniable. The lynchings and castrations where they were cutting off the breasts, the genitalia, fingers, ears, tongues of black people, black children, black females, black males. That's well documented. That's undeniable. And this is something that, again, this is not ancient history. We don't have to go back as far as the material, some of the material that Dr. Sugg was referencing. We don't have to go back to the 17th century. We don't have to go back to the 1700s. We don't need to do all that. We're talking about things that happened. Some of these people are still alive right now. Things that were happening in the 1950s, 1940s, 1960s even. We don't have to go way, way back. Really, if you want to talk about it, James Byrd Jr., 1990s. We're not talking about ancient history. So if this is well documented and, again, widespread, this is not a one-time anomaly thing where this was repeated over and over and over. And white people bragged about this and took photographs of this and shared it and were proud of this behavior. And we got this black person's fingers or penis or whatever the case may be stored and saved and kept it in a little jar to be proud of. Why would you think that this behavior would be discontinued at some point? This seems to be a core essential aspect of white culture, white behavior, that I don't really see any deviation. I don't see where this has gone anywhere. If anything, it's just that they don't get to brag as publicly about this sort of thing as often. But again, Kendrick Johnson, again, Lennon Lacey, I don't think that aspect got as much attention, but his body, his corpse being dug up after he was found mysteriously hanging, and they just say, oh, it was suicide moving forward. Just something that I would say keep in mind for folks who want to think about. As I always say, what does it mean to be white? Many of the core fundamental aspects of what it means to be a white person, they are unchanging. They are stable. You can look and see the same behavior patterns, the same practices, century through century, where it just does not change. They might try to do a better job of pretending that they have evolved and they've moved on and they don't do that sort of thing anymore. Say, do not be fooled. Do not be fooled. Last tidbit to just kind of hammer it home. Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., he was on the program. This is years back. We did the whole program talking about Jeffrey Dahmer, right on the same subject matter. Robert Dvorak, he wrote a biography on Jeffrey Dahmer, and he also wrote or not a biography, but he wrote about Jerry Sandusky and the whole thing at Penn State, white people sexually abusing all of these young boys. It was some speculation that quite a few of them were black children, where he was allowed to sodomize and rape these children with impunity for years and years and years. The documentary that just came out, Happy Valley, but Mr. Fuller was talking to him some years back, I think this is 2010, years before the Penn State thing even came out, and he gave his comments on if he was to give a general view about the essence of racism, white supremacy, and he said it's not Hitler, it's Jeffrey Dahmer. I thought that would be fitting for this program, so we'll get that in, and once that concludes, if anybody has thoughts that they want to share on what they heard from Dr. Sugg and the information, we'll have ample time. But this is Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. giving his views on Jeffrey Dahmer and a lot of what we heard from today.
For generalities, I generally say that if you want the ultimate expression of white supremacy and the white supremacist mentality, and you want to put it in the form of one person that I would name, and that's something I very seldom do, it would be Jeffrey Dahmer. He's the ultimate expression of white supremacy. Everything that he was doing, working in a chocolate factory, the whole 9 yards, and storing black males' bodies in canisters of lye and alcohol and whatnot, and got them in the refrigerator, and cannibalism and all of that, and calm, very methodical. Even when questioned by the law enforcement officers, very calm. Hannibal Lecter, you know. The ultimate. Aryan looking.
Wasn't he with young boys too?
Yeah, he was. I mean, I forgot how many bodies. Is something like 20 or something like that. You can probably look it up on the computer. Jeffrey Dahmer, you know. He didn't even try to protect him once he went to prison. He was so embarrassing to everybody, I guess. I mean, you know, everybody who really thinks like he does, they warned him out of the way. But the black guy killed him in prison.
Right. I remember that.
Yeah. See, and I think he was set up to be dead because, you know, he was considered a monster. So he's just as calm as he can be. You know, very methodical, very meticulous, went to work on time, excellent worker, working in a chocolate factory, looking at chocolate being churned all day. and out there trying to churn chocolate at night.
Mm.
The ultimate expression. Roman Empire. Black death associated, black anti-sex with non-white people associated ultimately with death as being the ultimate. Gather them up, befriend them to the extent that you're saying that, hey, I'm going to take you, a black male, and make you ultimately effeminate and then kill you.
Mm.
First chance I get.
And he ate them too, didn't he? Wasn't that his thing?
Yes, and eat the bodies, the body parts. Got them in got the body parts in wrappers in the refrigerator.
Mm.
And got other body parts, I mean, they didn't know what to do with, I mean, because he got so many. And got them in big drums full of acid and whatnot. Keep them right there. Not somewhere way out in the woods somewhere. Keep them right there in the apartment.
Mm.
And then go out and gather up some more. I mean, bringing them in one at a time.
Wow.
He probably, you can probably look his name up on the computer and get the whole story. I mean, from A to Z. And they've written several books on it and whatnot. I had newspapers and on it and all like that. But that's my statement, that he's the ultimate expression of that type of mentality. Not Adolf Hitler, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Wow.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because this is what ultimately this white supremacy at its greatest is that, particularly aiming at the black male, effeminize the black male and then take him and kill him after that. I mean, it's not enough just to make him into a thing, but then methodically and with an expression of affection, kill him. Because the black males he was picking up were very trusting of him. Hey, here's a nice white guy. I mean, he's buying me drinks and whatnot, and friendly, and, he ain't calling me nigger and wanting to drag me, and burn crosses on my lawn and whatnot. No, he wants to take me to his house. Oh, he's okay. Oh, yeah. Got to be some reason why a person would even think like that.
Hmm.
But the evidence shows that such people do exist.
Wow. Never even heard anybody mention Jeffrey Dahmer as, a racist or a racist suspect or anything.
Well, he would be a racist suspect just by being white, according to the code.
Mm-hmm.
He's able to be a racist, so he probably is one. That's code, according to what I've written.
Yes, sir.
And I stick with that. If a white person in the system of white supremacy is able to be a racist, he or she probably is one, period. That doesn't change until the end of white supremacy.
Mm.
That's the criteria for that. So that's a given.
Wow.
Based on what? Logic. Not panic, not irrationality or whatever that means. Not, just being super judgmental up front. No. That's logical. It's logical to believe that, because it's dangerous not to. I'm quite sure those fellows sitting around Jeffrey Dahmer probably thought, hey, this guy can't be a racist. He likes to hang out with black guys,
Mm-hmm.
all the time, Plenty of white guys around here. I mean, usually, he stands out. He don't even care what white guys think. He sits over here and drinks with the black guys. He's okay.
Wow, I didn't know that he worked in a chocolate factory. I'd heard the story, but
worked in a chocolate factory, standing right there churning chocolate all day long. And whole Sigmund Freud would have a field day with that one.
And Dr. Welson, that's right. What she had to say, too.
Well, she already has.
Wow.
It didn't mystify her at all.
Wow. Wow.
And his co-worker said, hey, easy going, easy get along, no problem, give nobody no problem at all, always on time, good worker, always did his job very efficiently. A systematic mass killer. And a cannibal. A white cannibal. Traditionally they always say black people were cannibals.
Yep. And nobody would suspect him. No suspicion at all from the
and this is why he got away with it so long. Got away with it, they were looking all around. Hiding in plain sight. Law enforcement officers talking to him. And he's saying, yeah, strange things happening, Got to be alert these days.
Wow. Wow.
Never was on the suspicion list. Like one so-called Asian guy, non-white, ran out in the street, flagged down a law enforcement car. Jeffrey Dahmer just sauntered right out behind him and said, oh, he's a little delusional, whatnot, Don't pay any attention to him. He's a nice guy, I'll look out for him. He's running from Jeffrey Dahmer. Managed to escape from him. And ran out in the street and flagged down a car. And the law enforcement officers helped Jeffrey Dahmer take him back in the house.
Wow.
Cool. Like ice under fire. Didn't show the least bit of nervousness. He wound up dead too. The guy, same guy. That's how they finally caught Jeffrey Dahmer. But not because of that. But that put that made him suspicious because he was reported missing and whatnot. I think that's how it went down. But the main thing was people started, getting these odors in the place where he lived. These strange odors. Where are these odors coming from? All those bodies up there he's carving up.
Mm. Wow. Wow. That is crazy. That is crazy.
So I just use him. Of course, there are other people who have done things similar and all like that, but I use Jeffrey Dahmer because with the exception of, I think the first person they had him on record was a person who was white. But that must have been OJT type thing.
Mm.
As on-the-job training. A white sacrifice. And then all the rest of them was non-white.
Was it mostly black males or?
Mostly black males. As far as they know, the last one was the Laotian, a non-white male from Laos. I think he was maybe about 17 years old, 18, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's an interesting study, but I say that he's the ultimate expression. Because, see, that's basically what the white supremacists do. With that racism, when you take it to its nth degree, it's destructive and goes right into, and the most destructive acts are something that's sexual or anti-sexual. That's why I put that in my book long before there was a Jeffrey Dahmer. Which it has to do with, hey, this is why, back in the old days, it wasn't enough just to lynch a black guy. No, hey, that ain't, hey, that's too much like, you feel like you might have lynched a man. You don't want to do that. I mean, take his sex organs out, Got to do that. Yeah, just don't hang a nigger, Cut all his sex organs out. Not enough to kill him. That's too much like killing a man. I mean, hey, you don't want to leave, don't even want to think in that direction that this creature is a man. That's competition. So make him a thing. Some type of creature. But we can't stand that idea of a black male being a man, physically and mentally. Those two together? No. Boy, maybe. Girl. Thing. But man, no. That's why the code is all about aiming for the production, universal man, universal woman. That's in the textbook. That's the ultimate goal with all of the characteristics. And it'll, in the next book, I just try to list a whole bunch of the characteristics. I mean, first of all, a person that believes in revelation of truth. Got to start with that one. And definitely be against racism and against any kind of injustice. I mean, these have got to be the characteristics of universal man and universal woman that will fit the character of the universe itself when it is not tampered with.
context of white supremacy. Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., folks want to support his effort, you can visit producejustice.com. Producejustice.com. You can get the word guide, code book, both. Definitely recommend his material. I know folks have heard him talktainment, as well as many times that he's been a guest on the program. But Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., before I get to some of the folks that dialed in, just a couple quick points. Number one, I did post Dr. Suggs' article, Return of the Body Snatchers. I have it on my Facebook page, should be with the link, so you can check it out. Shout out to non-white female, as I said, hooking me up with the resources so I can access university libraries. They have great material. Couldn't find it online, but I was able to access it through the university resources, so I have shared. You can take it as a PDF and check it out if you are so interested. I was reading the article in the break there, and in my view, this is one of the ways that Dr. Sugg might have been practicing racism, both in the article and on the program. In the article and on the program, he, in my view, minimized this theft, this looting of human organs and genetic material, and saying that these are rumors or these are urban legends or myths, however it was phrased. And I completely reject that. That is not the case at all. As I said, there's documented evidence, however you want to look at it. If you want to categorize what was happening with black people being lynched throughout the 20th century and beyond, and even after the Civil War in the 19th century, if you want to categorize that as organ theft and cannibalism, so be it. And or if you want to ride right on into the 21st century, and you can include Henrietta Lacks in that as well, right on into the 21st century. These Jeffrey Dahmer type incidents, this is not anomalous. Kendrick Johnson, this is not anomalous. Mr. Scotty Reed, founder of the Black Talk Radio Network, he posted 2 reports. You can check it out. It's right below the event for this page on my Facebook page. But he has one. It's Israeli doctors harvesting organs for international trafficking ring. And the next one is Israelis forerunners of organ trafficking. These, I suspect, are white people that are doing this. NPR just had a report on, it was maybe the last 2 weeks, it was this month, where they stopped a couple. Now, they were so-called Asians, not black, but they stopped them because they had a black child that they had adopted, and they stopped them because they thought that they might have had this child to steal, loot organs from this black child. This is widespread. This is not just a thing of rumor or people are just making up stuff, these unfounded allegations. No, this is happening. This is documented. And I just wanted to get that out because just from the tone of the report, Return of the Body Snatchers, it's, in my opinion, making it sound as though that although you might see an isolated case of this here or there, this is not widespread. These are just myths and rumors. And again, that, in my opinion, is not true. And that seems to be a staple in terms of something that white people do, in my opinion, to practice racism, to minimize the heinous terroristic behavior of whites, to try to make it seem like you might have an isolated incident of this here or there, but this is not widespread and endemic of what white people do worldwide. The latter, in my opinion, that is the case. This should not be looked at as just some random incident. This is standard systemic behavior on the part of whites. And I'm sure we probably only know the tip of the iceberg. I also wanted to get in because he mentioned Quentin Tarantino. It's in your face all the time. Now, he mentioned him specifically in saying get medieval. The line after Ving Rhames' character, the black male, had been anally sodomized by a white enforcement officer. But even in Quentin Tarantino's films, you see a lot of these same characteristics in terms of I won't say cannibalism, but definitely in terms of all this gore and flesh and taking body parts. You see that in Pulp Fiction, where it ends where a black male has his brains blown out, and they're talking about want you to pick up all those pieces of skull that said specifically, which is right in line with what he talked about on the program today, where they're going and taking people's skulls and what have you and doing this. Now, they don't make a trophy out of it and what have you, but I mean, they're spending all of this time picking up skull fragments and blood and all this other gore and what have you. It's right in your face. And I would say I'm very familiar with Quentin Tarantino's body of work. He has another film. It's a two-parter, Death Proof, where it's got the zombie element. There's some sort of chemical or what have you that white people have released, and it's turning people into zombies, and they're going and eating people, cannibalism, consuming flesh. And before you even get to all of that, they have a white male, because Bruce Willis, I think, is in it, but they have a white male. They have been going around and stealing people's genitals. And they have a scene where they have a big Ziploc bag, and it's got all these genitals in the bag, big bag full of testicles. And it gets to one point in the film where the bag of testicles spills out on the ground, and a guy falls on the ground, and the testicles end up going in his mouth. Now, this is in Quentin Tarantino's work. As I said, he mentioned him on the program. Now, I could just look at Quentin Tarantino's body of work. That is a consistent theme, not just the gore, but this worshiping. Isn't that in Django Unchained? Isn't that Leonardo DiCaprio, where he has a black male's skull, where he's kept it as a prize? Isn't that right in Django Unchained? And then he crushes the skull, and he cuts his hand in the process and gets blood on his hand, and he smears it across Carrie Underwood's face. It's right in your face, like nothing. It has not changed at all. This is white culture. This is white people. The gore, the blood, the cannibalism, the making trophies of human flesh. It's right in your face all the time. It is unchanging. It should not be minimized. We should recognize it for what it is. This is something that they enjoy doing. And even in a compensatory fashion, because I did think it was hugely important when he talked about the insecurity that they felt in relation to black people, Africans, and doing some of this to compensate, where they wanted to get these corpses and bodies from the continent to ingest, to grind up the skull and ingest it as a powder or a drink, or to get parts of the flesh and what have you to consume it. I am sure that continued, even the consumption part. I suspect that might be one aspect that we just have not been told about, in terms of them not just castrating a black male or removing fingers, ears, tongue, teeth, and all of that. I am certain that there was some consumption of these body parts along the way as well, that we just haven't been told about. That you don't get everything. You just have to kind of figure it out as you go. But I'm sure that was an integral aspect of it as well. The inferiority that they talked about, I thought that was a major Welsing moment as well, when they were talking about the size of the pyramids and being upset and trying to go through all this trouble to prove that the pyramids weren't as tall as some of the structures and edifices that whites in Europe had constructed. Major reminded me of Dr. Welsing moment. Let's see, anything else that I wanted to make sure I got in before get the calls. Oh, he mentioned Rod Ferrell, the vampire killer. There's a documentary on Mr. Ferrell. I posted that on the page as well. It's about an hour. You can check it out. It's on YouTube. It's titled Rod Ferrell, the Vampire Killer. It's a full documentary where he was going out drinking blood and what have you. And again, I would, in my opinion, that is just standard aspect of racist white culture, where he said he was releasing it on Halloween. I think I've said pretty consistently that no holiday is more representative of what it means to be a white person, white culture, what white people are all about, the essence of what it means to be white, than Halloween. I looked on my block, and I live around almost exclusively white people. I looked up and down my street. White people, they went hard. They went ham for Halloween. I saw way more decorations, and they were way more elaborate to celebrate Halloween than for Christmas. Now, there are most of the houses, they do have up Christmas decorations and what have you, but it was a whole lot more for Halloween. They had the skulls and bones and skeletons and all that stuff, just worship of death. They had all of that stuff all over the yard, macabre, just every aspect of it, the blood and gore and everything. They had that stuff up way in advance. Like Christmas, it looks like everybody just kind of did a lackluster effort to celebrate Christmas, but they really get excited for the gore. And I guess I can end with, I was trying to think of the next book that we were going to do for the study session, because we'll be done with Henrietta Lacks this Friday. American Sniper, that's being released on Christmas Day. just like Django Unchained. I said, pay attention to that. It's become a tradition now. They release a big film on December 25th. You should pay attention to what film that is. This is a film about a white killer. Now, this is supposed to be Christmas. I thought we were supposed to be about the Lord's Day. This is Jesus's birthday. I thought that's what they say. That's what December 25th is supposed to be about. We're not releasing a movie that's anything about being pious, being Christian. We're releasing a film about a killer, someone who is recognized in his book, American Sniper, where they say this is the most successful killer in the history of the Navy. I think he brags about having killed over 160 people. That's what he's got on the front of the book for American Sniper, a gun. This is what we want to worship and celebrate. That is white people. That is white culture. Killing, and ostensibly, it should be understood, killing non-white people, especially black people. I'm pretty much decided that is going to be the next book because I wanted to read that anyway for the study session. But the fact that that's coming out on December 25th pretty much has sealed the deal. I think that's going to be the next book. And the fact this guy died too. He was shot and killed. We were having Dr. Rasayan on the program, and I think he was shot and killed at a gun range, no less. This happened last year in February of 2013. But at any rate, I will stop there. I think I covered most of what I wanted to get in. I might have a tidbit here or there. If any of the folks that are listening in had anything that they wanted to share, what they heard from Dr. Sugg, if anything didn't make sense, if you were confused, anything stood out, feel free. You can get a hand up. The caller at 0586 should be with us. 909, Mr. Demery 4, and we had a caller from a block number just got a hand up. Since I heard from everybody else, I didn't hear from the caller from a block number. Did you have something you wanted to share since we hadn't heard from you yet, person from a block number?
Yes. Good evening, Gus. This is Dee. Good evening, everyone else. I apologize. I did not hear the presentation by the guest. Hello? Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. But, it just brings back some, eerie memories, because I worked in the medical field. And the scariest thing to me, besides, having, obviously, I will have to admit, actually, I was really traumatized. I worked in surgeries and, intensive care and research and all that, and I won't name the facilities, although I really wish I could because they're very prominent, but it's so hard for people to believe some of these stories. I guess I can understand to some extent because I was kind of shocked myself, even though, because I was young and I had, I had always kind of like done some medical training, even lab work from the time I was a teenager in high school, but I was just like totally traumatized by seeing the things that I saw, and in fact, some of the stuff still haunts me, but I couldn't, say anything really, and the thing that bothers me as much as what transpires in that regard is trying to, get people to believe it, that's what really, really bothers me because I feel like, okay, we have an obligation to, to pass this information on, and I wonder, okay, what are we doing wrong that we're not able to get enough people? Maybe they're just silent. Maybe there's more people who accept it and believe it than we really perhaps think. But I guess because we get socialized into believing, like I was, medical field, that's just great work, and these people are, they're kind of like head and shoulders above, not just in terms of intellect, but, the greater good, all that kind of, I guess, brainwashing, you might say. But it was just scary to see, the attitude, towards the human body in particular, the body of people of colors. But, I remember sharing, some of the events with my husband, about what I was experiencing, and he finally said, well, it's like you're working in a death camp. And in fact, he wanted me to, to quit, but I'm like, no, I got to get these skills. I have to get all the skills that I can. I have to learn to be like them, and that I don't let it bother me. And it's almost like I had to have almost like take on another personality to be able to deal with some of the things that I saw. You know, I remember one case in particular where I'm actually standing there, and there's a black male patient. This was like years ago. This is going to show you how traumatizing some of this stuff was. And they weren't really doing what needed to be done. I mean, I knew this, but this time I had enough experience. And I just kind of like, you learn to kind of like have I guess what they call a clinical disposition. You learn over years not to be emotional about stuff. And so I was like giving them data about, the changes that was going on. And I knew what the interventions were supposed to be. And they were like, oh, yeah, okay. And I'm like, in my mind, it was like my mind was kind of like split. I'm like, okay, I'm seeing this, but I don't believe it. I mean, I know I told them, I gave them the right information. I know what they generally do and they're supposed to do, and they're kind of like letting this guy die, and that's kind of like what happened, but you can't, well, I guess you can to some extent now, but these are things that happen. But so, like, who do you tell? How do you convey this kind of information to, people, press people that what the system is really about? I think maybe people are probably a lot more conscious now, maybe with all the stuff that's going on, and there's some, we have put out some good books about it. But I think it's very hard for people to understand exactly what the medical system is really about, what it's really like, and the type of personalities that are involved in this. I mean, I was just, even like if you look at the curriculum that you're given in terms of, what you study when you're going through this field, it's kind of like, I don't know, like someone else said, it's all towards, like everything else, it's geared towards white supremacy domination. You think, okay, well, I need to learn this and learn that, and you find out, hey, this is mostly like about like research. It's really not like about like helping people per se, And yeah, that's kind of like what I wanted to say. Kind of like briefly, it is like you said, nothing has changed. It's gotten more sophisticated with the technology, and I see more and more they're being very selective about people of color being involved in this. So it's getting it's very technical, of course, now. So it's not enough to, whatever you get in college or grad school, medical school, you have to get the training on the job because the technology is, so much more advanced and it's expanding so much. But, yeah, this is their personality, and this is what's promoted. I mean, like, so you don't ask questions. If you want to stay in the field, you have to kind of keep your mouth shut or you're going to be unemployed. That's the way it goes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Some of the other folks who dialed in who I hadn't heard from yet, the caller at 0747, you should be with us. And Esther, you should also be with us as well. Did you two have anything you wanted to make sure you got in?
What's going on, Gus?
White supremacy.
This is Mr. Hill. I know I haven't called in such a long time, so I wanted to see how you was doing.
Right, poorly. Is that Mr. Hill from like way back, like 2009?
Yeah, way back.
Wow.
When you first came on.
That is crazy. Good to hear from you, sir.
Yeah. Did you have a doctor talking about a group of white people mutilating two young black kids or males and having sex on top of them?
We did. I didn't bring that up today, but that is another excellent illustration because these were young white people. These were not,
right.
The Clive and Bundy or what have you, but absolutely. I think that case happened last year where they killed the black person and then had sex on top of the corpse.
Yeah, Dr. Tommy Curry said something about that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So, would you call that a ritualistic type of thing, or is that something that white people do all the time?
I'm of the opinion that I don't think that is anomalous. I think that it's probably something that we just don't hear about. very often, but I've said consistently, if you pay attention to a lot of movies, I have seen that where killing a black person seems to function as some sort of aphrodisiac for racists. Now I raised this point with Dr. Welsing, and she didn't, on the program, and she didn't seem to think that it bared out. But hey, that's fine. My view, I've seen it consistently in films.
Right,
This
and you
act,
can think,
just
yeah, you can,
where they kill a black person, and that seems to, in fact, I can even think of some specific scenes where they'll kill a black person, and then the very next thing will be a sex scene between a white person and a white man and a white woman where they've killed a black person. I've seen that bear out consistently in films where I think just sometimes it's just the act of violence, period, seems to be something that is like, yes, we need that for the sex drive for racist man and racist woman, racist woman, violence, blood. Yes, that is sex. That makes it that's like Viagra for us, makes it possible for us to have sexual intercourse.
like, Marshall's Ball and Green Mile, things that come to my mind. And Star Trek, the new one. I mean, I forgot the young lady's name. The black young lady that played in Star Trek.
I didn't see the latest one.
I haven't seen the latest one. I just seen the her. What else? Even Quentin Tarantino's, especially Quentin Tarantino's movies, they're nothing but gore. What's the movie?
Zoe Salonda. I think that's the one you're talking about, where she was in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Zoe Salonda. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cowbell.
Pulp Fiction is one for me.
Absolutely.
Kill Bill.
Absolutely. All of his works, really, in my opinion, is just about killing, and as some of the films that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, the guest mentioned Pulp Fiction. That was the film he was referencing when he was talking about getting medieval about it. And he's in the UK, mind you, just to show the global nature. He seemed to be very informed about Walking Dead, as well as the works of Quentin Tarantino. That is global. This is not just something that, with regards to America, that racist entertainment, white culture is worldwide, where white people all around the world appreciate and recognize Quentin Tarantino's work, as well as The Walking Dead. It's ubiquitous.
Even Blade. With
Wesley Snipes.
Wesley Snipes and Sanaa Lathan. You don't remember that one? Hello?
With Wesley Snipes, yes, I saw Blade, yes, sir.
Yeah, with Sanaa Lathan was in that movie. Sanaa Lathan was Wesley Snipes' mother, and she got bitten by the white guy. They actually, when they killed him.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one. Yeah. So I don't understand these vampire movies anyway. Oh, by the way, I was looking at YouTube, and Spike Lee is supposed to be doing a documentary on blood.
A documentary on what?
On blood.
Okay.
And he's going to go into a whole thing about how people use blood or have a necrophilia about it. I don't know when it's supposed to be coming out, but he was doing one of those things where you ask for things where you ask for money to do the film.
Right.
And one of his things he wanted to do was about blood. I don't know when it's going to come out, but it's kind of strange for African American director to do something about blood. So he said it's supposed to come out sometime this year, next year, something like that. So we're on the lookout for it.
Appreciate that. I'll post it once I get a link for folks. Did S. Dot, you should be with us as well. Did you have something you wanted to make sure you got in?
Good afternoon. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Just about the organs missing out of cadavers or corpses or even individuals that are still alive. My understanding of the autopsy process is that when the remains come into the coroner's office and they begin the autopsy, that they make 2 incisions from the left and the right shoulder blade to the center of the chest, and then they cut down towards the abdomen, and they take a saw and they crack open the sternum, and they remove everything in the chest cavity, the lungs, the heart, and so forth, and they weigh them, and they take samples of each of them to test the temperature and the toxicity of any of the fluids. And these things are supposedly discarded because what is delivered to the funeral parlor is actually a husk, which is devoid of any of the organs. All of those organs have been removed before it gets to the funeral parlor. So the fact that it has recently come up that it's controversial that they've dug up the remains of this black young man and they said that he didn't have his organs in place, I was kind of, perplexed by that, considering that it's a widespread process that they remove the organs prior to the corpse going to, or the husk going to the funeral parlor. So if anyone has any information that contradicts this, because with the exception of some so-called religious practices, like those who practice Judaism, so that their organs remain in place and they don't have an autopsy performed and they're buried within a certain time frame, unless it's suspected to be so-called foul play like a homicide. Most other people, their organs are removed. So if anyone has any information about that and could explain or differentiate how it's different in these situations where people are saying there's something incorrect or inappropriate about this young black male who they exhumed his corpse, his husk, and found that he didn't have his organs as opposed to any other person not having their organs, I'd appreciate it.
Messi?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. As most of the time, when back in the day, if you had a dysfunction as far as your organs as a human, they'll feed you the part of the organ that you had a problem with. So most of the people who donate their organs, some of those organs are used for like supplements and stuff like that. So they grind up something like liver is one thing, spleen is another, different organs that they use in certain medicines that they use, human cadavers, things of that nature. We use tendons, livers, lungs, just about anything they could use for medicine, they use it. Especially when it comes to supplementation. A lot of natural stores have pieces of grind up liver that people take that have blood disorders. So people sell their organs. They don't know where their organs are going, but most of the time they're going for science, or if they catch them early enough, they're probably going to other people who need them.
Okay, I'm clear on that, but my I guess my point of contention is that I understand that the accusation is being put forth that they're taking some people's organs under some very nefarious conditions, where they might have access to an individual's medical records and decide that they want to
let this person expire in any way so that they can now take his kidneys or his heart and harvest it for another individual. I understand that aspect of it, but what my point was is that what I'm hearing oftentimes is it's being suggested that they're disproportionately taking the organs of one group of people, and the widespread practice isn't to remove the organs of cadavers when they come into the coroner. Because my understanding was that they removed the organs of pretty much everyone, as I said, with the exception of those circumstances where it might be for religious practice or so forth. They pretty much remove the organs of pretty much everyone.
Right.
Yeah, speak.
And you saying and you're only saying that they only move black people's organs. I mean, use black people's organs for
No, well, my question was that it's often suggested that they're taking the organs of black people or some black people for different purposes, whether it be medicinal, whether it be to harvest the organs, to reuse them in other folks, whatever the purpose is, whether they're digesting them, whether they're using them in sexual play, whatever the reasons are. But what my thing is that it appears that what's being suggested is that they're taking black people's organs, but they're not taking the organs of other people, that other people, non-black people, are being put into the grounds with their organs intact. And my understanding, or the information that I have to date, is that that's not accurate, that across the board, people, with the exception of religious practices in certain situations, are being put into the ground or being, people who are being cremated are being done so without their organs being intact, those organs haven't been removed by the coroner or the medical examiner.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I got it now.
Dee, did you want to respond?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Did you want to respond?
Oh, yes. It's kind of complicated. I've looked at, over the past couple of decades, a couple hospitals, and different economic and various races, whatever. It varies. Okay. First of all, when you go, the technology now is so, I should say, advanced. Okay. For example, different people in the hospital have access to different information about various patients depending on what your code is. Okay, I'm saying that to say that for certain things, for example, probably most of us know, you go in, they ask you to give a certain amount of data, your religious preferences, what to do in case of an emergency, et cetera, et cetera. Sadly, for most of perhaps people of color or people who are less affluent or whatever, and class is an issue, not as much as race, but it definitely is an issue when you go into the hospital, because you indicate if you have a position, and if you do have one, they will make it known to the staff, hey, look, don't mess with my patient, et cetera. But my point being that your case is staffed, and a lot of people know things about you, right on down to the nurse, maybe to the medical technologist, whatever, the whole team. It's a team thing. So it's not difficult for people to get access to your information, okay? Even just someone who does your blood gas analysis or whatever. So, so it doesn't, the rules that are on paper, just like the laws that we have, and what gets done are a whole different matter. And, for example, like when a patient comes in or whatever, that person gets staffed right on down. I was the first in my naivety taken aback by the first thing that's generally said at any staffing or whatever is your race. A 53-year-old black male, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So people are kind of like in the team, they know what the deal is. So in terms of, to address to some degree what the protocol might be in terms of removing organs, whatever, a lot depends on your religion. To my knowledge now, I've kind of like East and West parts of the United States, in not low-income hospitals and such. So at some of the so-called better hospitals, the protocol is what you put on your information when you come in, what's said subsequently. I don't mean to sound, apologize if I may sound condescending or whatever, but in reference to lower income people, whatever ethnicity, but yes, particularly because blacks, because it's not racist or arrogance or saying, oh, we're so superior, we've got better organs. But the truth of the matter is, in some regards, that has manifest that, we do, okay? So, and even to the extent that it may not be true, there's still that, as you say, the mythology sometimes supersedes the reality of science. Okay, so my point being that a lot of information that maybe a more learned person may give in terms of what their priorities or the references might be in terms of what we want to be done to dad or mom or whatever, or how we want to be something to be handled in the case that they would, as they say, expire, might be a lot less for black people because we come in and we're all emotional and then we tend to see that white coat and those degrees and all those other certification letters and like, oh, okay, doc, just do whatever. And that happens a lot, and that's enough to make you want to cry sometimes because, people are stressed and they're dependent on this white coat, just like white Jesus and the preacher or whatever. So I'm saying, to my understanding, and I certainly could be incorrect, in terms of protocol, that to routinely remove a person's organs, that is not the case. Now, they may do that, but it's not general protocol. You are supposed to have an input as to what you want to have done. But then there are other things that people can say to you. For example, generally, in most places, if someone were to, like I'm saying to say, someone asked Scott, that people can get access to your information before you expire, before you get in that situation. I mean, like, just to work in some of these facilities, the test that you have to go through as a staff member for myself, when I ask for my records when I went from one place to the other, okay, I went on my total medical records, because particularly if you do work for the federal government or whatever, they do all these tests on you. You got to pass the, this blood test and all this kind of stuff, whatever. It was like about 2 inches. I'm like, wait a minute, why do they need all of that on me just for me to do what I'm doing? So I'm saying, and people do hope, for example, in medical records or wherever, they may have information on you all about your physiology, your medical history. There's a lot of personal information. And so one cannot assume that simply because, and yes, you are supposed to sign documents that you won't share information, blah, 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 but people are human. So, no, I think that people are genuinely surprised, shocked, or whatever, or taken aback to find that these organs are missing, perhaps because maybe they didn't read the fine print, they didn't sign off on this is our religious belief, and therefore we want this to be done, and we don't want that to be done. And so it's done, or people don't read, or they can't read, or don't read well. So that's how it happens. But I think one should not expect that simply because, you expire, that unless you state otherwise, that your organs are, going to be routinely removed. Because from the time that a person expires or whatever, there's a whole protocol asked about, like if you're Jewish or if you're Islamic or whatever, you want to come in and wash the body. That's supposed to be respected, but that doesn't necessarily get respected, kind of like with us. And particularly if someone expires suddenly, people are, it's kind of sad, but, people tend to get in the uproar and everybody's crying and all this stuff is going on. So that causes a lot of confusion in reference to black people. And when it comes to an organ, as to whether or not, just my opinion, okay, because I don't have the stats, I can only just say what I have observed, when it comes to, and what I know, because I'm not privy to, you know, all the little machinations that they do. But when it comes to whether or not someone is selectively taking a black organ versus a European or whatever, well, you know, black people don't have all the documentation and all the checks and balances in terms of, you know, looking out for their loved one or the resources as other people, you know. So, yes, I mean, of course, racism is in all aspects of our activities, and so why would it be otherwise? We are, you know, black people are more accessible. You know, sometimes we don't have our family always going in, you know, checking on us every day. We have to work or whatever, or we can't afford to get there, just like with the brother who had Ebola in Dallas, and his family could not, you know, they were not allowed to get to him or see him from the time that he was placed in the Dallas hospital. But according to his nephew, if I understand it correctly, he said his uncle was saying to him, but all these other people are walking around, you know, I don't know why you all can't come here because other people's relatives are still coming here and I'm here. So, you know, we don't always know the protocol. What is on paper and what they do are different things, and it's very difficult sometimes, this is just in my experience, to explain to, you know, people of color the procedure. And, you know, depending on your level of whatever your level is in the hospital in terms of what your position is, whether you're the doctor or you're the nurse or other persons, you have to advocate or defer to the doctor, because oftentimes a patient will say, hey, why are they doing this to me? Why are they doing that? And you might know that, yeah, you need to ask some questions, but, I mean, like, what, you know, there's still this God complex about the person in the white coat or the doctor. It's like the person will know that something is not being done correctly to them, but they're so overwhelmingly intimidated by white people. I mean, I've seen it. You know, even some of the most educated blacks that will come in, you know, they just like, I mean, when you're sick, yes, that puts you in a very vulnerable position. That's why I say always take somebody with you or whatever. But that's my understanding. And there's certain information you're supposed to give to the facility when you enter.
Hang on a second, D. I appreciated the response. Just, you know, I wanted to make sure that other folks, if they had anything they wanted to.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's no apologies needed. I appreciated the response. I was listening because I know you said you had some medical background that I don't have. I'm sure a lot of other folks don't have either. I did want to check just to make sure we got too far afield if folks had anything that they wanted to get in with regards to what Dr. Suggs said. I do think the question that S. raised is important. I do not have a medical background, make sure I get that in, and am ignorant about pretty much everything, including racism. That being said, I did check the research that I did online once you asked the question and looking around from the different sites that I went to. It does seem like the protocol, I think, pretty much in line with what Dee said, that they do remove the organs, that standard procedure during an autopsy. But from the several sites that I went to, if they were going to be permanently removed, that is supposed to be something that the family is informed about, that they're supposed to be involved in that process if they're going to be permanently removed. And I could definitely see that being something, anything where white people would have the ability to make some sort of choice where it's going to be subjective. It'll be up to that person. They have some discretion over what's going to happen or not. I definitely, anything where white people, it's up to them. They have discretion about what's going to happen. That's where the racism is going to be big at, in terms of them either not informing the black person about this, in terms of do they want the organs permanently removed, or what they're doing exactly with the body. I could easily see that happening in a system of racism, white supremacy on a constant basis, where that information is not being relayed, where they're not making an effort to adequately explain the procedure to the black person. But from the several medical sites that I went to, and I can share those if folks want to check them out for themselves, if they're going to be permanently removed and not the organs and not replaced in the body, that is supposed to be a decision that is supposed to involve the family members, that they're supposed to have some authority over whether or not that's going to be a permanent removal. But again, I do not have or claim any expertise in the medical field. I could be in error, but that did seem to kind of line up with what Dee was saying. Did folks have any other comments that they wanted to make sure that they got in about what Dr. Suggs had shared on the program, if folks heard that?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any comment. It's just related to the organ issue, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And would you be able to share those websites you went to?
Sure.
I'd be interested in that.
Sure.
Okay.
If I put them on Facebook, will that work?
That'll be awesome.
Cool.
Yeah. And then is Scott still on the line?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. In reference, I don't know if this website that I just found may answer your question, but have you been to this website called truthaboutorgandonation.com?
No, ma'am.
Okay, it may shed some light on your question, and also, too, it has a section, I think in the materials section, which has a link to a medical card to indicate one's refusal for organ donation, because you're stating here that all of this must be documented, and I don't know if the young lady that was speaking before was aware of that as well. And that particular information is found at lifeguardianfoundation.org. So I just wanted to share those resources. And then I have a question for the lady that was talking. Do you know if in the U.S. medical school program, if abortions are a standard part of the medical school curriculum, or if it's not during the, I don't know the breakdown, but the initial basic courses that medical students take, if it's in the gynecological specialist section? Is that standard part of of becoming a medical student? Are they required to perform abortions? Are you talking to? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I could answer a little. Sorry to interject, because my niece is studying to be a gynecologist, and she is in her first year of medical school. That is a more specialized procedure. They generally across the board, they get information about it to recognize what are the signs if a woman is in jeopardy of, losing a fetus, what's a viable fetus, and things of that nature. But in terms of aborting a natural fetus, that's something that would be under specialized procedures, specifically when they get further along into, like, the beginning into their residency. From what my niece has told me, that's not something that they teach a first or second year medical student. They're learning about general biology and procedures, and that's something that's more specialized. So if anybody else has any information that's different, please share.
Thank you.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Hi. I wanted to comment too in terms of to my present understanding. Like I said, this could have changed whatever. But even getting back to the issue as regards to autopsies, there are some circumstances under which the state, which there are agencies, federal and state, and medical regulations that somewhat can supersede a relative's choice. And that is, for example, if a patient, for example, expires in surgery, I came across, I had a relative who, particularly I'll say about the state of Maryland or whatever, if someone expires doing surgery or whatever, and there has to be at least an informal investigation, and perhaps I'm using the wrong term, investigation, that tends to have a negative connotation, but let's just say a review, as to what transpired. And so that, for example, I know relatives were presented with the situation that okay, we don't know why what happened, and so we have to have this investigation review. In that case, if the only way to make a determination as to what transpired would be for them to do an autopsy, because these particular relatives were very much against, any kind of autopsy being done, then it can be to some extent taken out of the family's hands. I just don't know exactly how that got weighed, because maybe some people might want to challenge it legally or whatever. But if that's presented to a person, and for example, if you have a loved one and they went in, for example, like with Joan Rivers, okay, with a routine procedure that was supposed to be a piece of cake in and out or whatever, and then all of a sudden, I'm sorry, she's gone, then there's something that happens, the investigation. And in that case, organs might be taken, lost, or used, or whatever. Just want to say, so there's some things that are from state to state that differ in terms of rules and regulations, just like everything else.
Thank you for that.
I find the process fascinating, particularly because my father is a recipient of an organ. So just learning about the process of how it occurred that he ended up with an organ from a 25-year-old black male, and he's in his 60s, was pretty interesting to just learn about how the process happens for a person to receive an organ. I mean, I worked in a dialysis unit for about 7 years as an administrator, and I had a number of patients who received transplants, and that was pretty interesting to learn about that process too. So, but I would just encourage every person, just from an administrative perspective, seeing how it is in terms of intake and people signing off on forms that they don't understand. If you could visit your local hospital, or if you know someone who has access to that information, an intake form, to just take the time to really go through the form and familiarize yourself with what you're actually signing, and also, explore the living will aspect of, what you would want to have done to yourself in the event that, you're in a life or death crisis, how you want your care to be dealt with. Don't wait until, you're in a situation where somebody may steal your organs, have some other nefarious things that they want to do with you, and be clear with your family members.
Great recommendations. Great recommendations. I find that a bit difficult to believe. Just checking in, since we have a few minutes left, about 20 or so before the end of the broadcast. No one had any thoughts on what they heard from Dr. Sugg?
Oh, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah. I definitely did. I got kind of confused during the conversation. Could you kind of bring us back? What was some interesting things that you thought of? Because my brain is a little scrambled right now.
Let's see.
Oh, I will say this as far as Mr. Fuller goes. Sorry, I found it interesting. Mr. Fuller was on to something, and he kept. I just felt like he kept reiterating, like, Jeffrey Dahmer, yeah, Jeffrey Dahmer, and I think that speaks to a bigger question of, he said he said that that's the Hitler is not the poster child for racism, white supremacy. Jeffrey Dahmer is. And I think that's the part we're not understanding. Like, he even said it. He's like, what, who thinks of this? Where did that thought even come from? And that's the part that we're not getting. You know what I'm saying? That's the deep question. Is, just like, who thinks of this stuff? I was even, just reading that we were talking about them outlawing bathing in one of the kings, George, in outlawing bathing, just how, and I wrote too, like a lot of projection, how they're able to project onto us their own psychosis, their own psychosis. You know what I'm saying? I just find that extremely interesting, and I think that, with books like this, and I think this book, people need to definitely read it and take notes, and make copies of points and share this information, because like you said, it's still going on today. Most definitely, you just hear rumors, just like when you heard Dr. Umar. Now, somebody's watching Hidden Colors 3, and they get to that part. They say, oh, he's a conspiracy theory, and, he's a nut, you know what I'm saying? And I kind of could see someone saying, oh, that's a conspiracy, conspiracy theory, or something. So, I think that, this is a key, and Mr. Fuller was basically saying the same thing. He was onto something. I don't know if that was just his senses or whatever, or what I mean, but connecting all the dots. But he said he knew that this was a integral aspect of racism, white supremacy. This cannibalism, and I just think it's the I think it's a key, man. It's like a key, and it's reality, and it's something that if you do a little study and find out maybe more about it, that you'll have some insight into racism, white supremacy, like a mug.
Oh, Gus, can I comment on something you said?
Yes, ma'am.
When you mentioned sex and blood and this cannibalism, you were kind of like putting them together. Did I get that right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's interesting because I had a girlfriend of mine. Her mother was very much into a lot of research. She worked for a newspaper, whatever, and she had done a lot of reading in that regard, and she had. At that time, I guess I thought it was kind of like scary or whatever, and she said, just as you are suggesting, I haven't, done any, really reading or research into the area, but she was saying that, she had done some reading about mass murderers and, all that, and she was saying, I remember because it stuck in my head, she said, they found that there was a lot of sexual activity going on sometimes, even when these people were killing their suspects. So she was saying there was a definite correlation between, sex and this type of monstrous behavior, that this was how they were, I think you used the term euphoric. I mean, it kind of like gave them an orgasm kind of, I guess Jess is not on or whatever, but she's old enough now, right? That it was, just doing this is almost like orgasmic for them. And there was a definite correlation between, these type of people historically, these famous and not so famous, infamous murderers, and, their sexual abnormalities, as it were, in regard to their behavior. And yeah, I think you should make like a little clip of Mr. Fuller talking about. I agree with 909 on that. I think that's just a really phenomenal the way he laid that out, because people need to get it.
Gus?
Yes, sir.
I was thinking about another program that talked about that. Sleepy Hollow, the Fox.
Oh yeah.
That's probably. Can I get a cowbell, please?
Let's see. there. Almost there. All right.
Yeah, that's probably the dumbest show I've ever seen in my life. I don't know how could you create a movie or a series based on a fictional character and then bring in the American Revolutionary War at the same time.
I haven't
Well,
seen
I seen the Sleepy Hollow, and one thing I would say, I seen one program of that. It was on at a relative's house, and they had Benjamin Franklin basically was killing somebody. Now, when I seen that, that was like I said, I don't watch TV. I haven't watched TV for over 10 years. But when I seen it, you know, they were laughing. They said, "Oh, they have old Ben as a psychopathic killer," you know, and it was blood and it was real, you know, there was a lot of blood and stuff like that. But I remember them finding bones under Benjamin Franklin's house, and they were connecting him with some secret society and saying that he was, you know, he was part of some secret society, and they were doing sacrifices and stuff like that. So I guess you gotta know some history. Well, not yeah. So it might not make sense to some people, but if I don't know, man.
He has some interesting points from the book. It's a very long book. I will say that it's like about 1,000 pages by the time you get to the end. But it's one of those you can just kind of read, flip as you go. You shouldn't have to be rushed through. You can just pick up and read as you're interested. But this is from page 57, where he says there seem then to have been medically authorized vampires abroad in Italy and Spain and perhaps England in the 13th century, men, possibly also women, who habitually consumed the life forces of their fellow human beings in order to stave off both the rigors of age and the final hand of death itself. At another level, it is possible that the medieval alchemy of blood compromised a tradition of medical cannibalism, which was more or less independent of the tradition centered on Egyptian mummies. If this is so, it is clearly significant both from a social and anthropological viewpoint. It suggests that European Christians were effectively able to surmount the nominally very basic taboo against cannibalism not once but twice. As we will see, once this prohibition was broken, it was broken with a vengeance and for many centuries to come. Again, emphasizing that this was widespread. He even at one point says that this was systemic cannibalism, not just an anomaly here or there, that this was all over the place. Powerful white people, poor white people, everybody was participating in this. And he even has scenes where at the gallows, right, they're going to hang people or to chop their head off. You would have people waiting with a bowl to go get blood. I mean, literally, like the corpse is spewing blood, right? They just chopped somebody's head off. You got people waiting with a bowl, with a cup, so they can go get some and slurp it down. I think he talked about some of that on the program, but I mean that this was common, happening all the time. And even the executioner, this being a source of side income where you can, snatch some of the blood or snatch some of the fat or bone material out of the person that you just killed, and you can, have a little side market going on, that this was widespread.
You know what I'm interested about reading the book is because to convince people that this is okay, it might have been, I think convince people that it's okay. I think it was something that they already have motivations to believe, but it always takes somebody to write something, real convincing. Then once that happens, then people's, then they can just widespread it. So I'll be interested in getting some of the names of people that wrote about this, this practice of cannibalism and whatnot, and their arguments to try to convince people. Because he was even saying during like the Roman gladiators that people were waiting for the gladiators' body parts. That's in the book too, huh?
If he didn't spend a whole lot of time on that, because that's a little bit before where this book starts at, it's just kind of mentioned in passing. I actually heard him say that in a different interview that he did where he spent more time on it, but that's not because that's just not the focus of the time period of this book. That's just kind of a passing glance in the book.
Yeah, I shouldn't. Yeah, I take it too back. I mean, take it too far back to the Roman times. But I think it's definitely sometimes I don't like saying natural, like it's encoded in their genetic makeup or anything like that. But I definitely think maybe because just because it's hard to prove. But I definitely think it's something in their nature, something very life essence lacking in life essence that they're trying to get.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. Yeah.
That's why I say it reminded me of Yurugu and Dr. Welsing's theory, particularly that portion where they talk about the insecurity with Egypt, Africans, black people having this insecurity, this sense of inferiority. I mean, that lines up perfectly. We are missing some. I read that, Pat. That's why I was stunned. Like, you all heard this and nobody had any comments on this? Like, wow. But yeah, them stating and him having quotes from all these people about the inferiority that they felt in relation to Egypt, the continent of Africa, and these black people and their accomplishments and what they had done, and this huge industry that evolved around stealing corpses, mummies from the continent and bringing them back so that people could crush up the skulls and eat their body parts and what have you and ingest that life force. That to me seems very much compensatory, making up for something that is lacking, right in line, in my opinion, with Dr. Welsing's theory and Yurugu, where she says that they are incomplete beings. This is something that they have to do. And I think she even he said it, as well as Dr. Marimba Ani says it. They were doing this stuff to other white people, and it just got turned to, let's just do this to black people as opposed to us doing it to ourselves. But he outlines that in the book where the Protestants and Catholics, where they were fighting and eating each other and cannibalizing each other and auctioning off each other's hearts and everything. I mean, just it's grisly, man. It's grisly. But I totally agree. I think it gets to I think I said that specifically. I think it hits to an essence. This is something that is a fundamental aspect of white culture and how white people behave. I mean, this is, in my opinion, it's getting right to the core of the essence of what it means to be white.
And it being attached to the medical industry. These so-called doctors, these so-called doctors, man, these physicians, the medical field, they kill 800,000 people a year, more than any other. I mean, it's like up there. It's like more than cancer, more than any high, mortality type of, people we know that kills people. It's the medical industry. 800,000 people a year, but you don't see that plastered all on the news. And I think that's a tie-in also, man. These witch doctors, these people that we call doctor, man, they're the biggest killers. And man, that's another tie-in. They kill the most people. You go to the doctor for something, they say that they made a mistake, and you end up dead. At 800,000, this is 800,000 a year, where people is preventable deaths.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things, as I said, when I was more confused and still being startled, that I learned was in a graduate course that I was taking. They actually said, for example, that, say for instance, that they're saying now that normal blood pressure is like 120/80, right? So I remember in the text and in the discussion it was being said, well, if we change those parameters, if we change those variables as to what's normal versus what's abnormal, that increases income for pharmaceutical units, that increases more money for doctors. Say, for example, if they now say that, 120/80, that used to be normal, but that's like kind of like borderline normal. You really should be like 110. Okay, they got like maybe 100,000 so more people that are going to go to the doctor, and the doctor's going to say, well, you have hypertension now, so you need to, get this medication or whatever, this procedure. And I was like, huh? so when we find out we have physicians and people in the medical field that are these doctors, who we think are so, almost like, Jesus' white coat and angel wings and all that kind of stuff, you've already been through all of this programming, because nobody said anything when that was said. I mean, I'm like thinking, looking around like, okay, that's like, that is immoral, it's unethical. In other words, they're not basing on what really is norm for a human body. They're basing it on this stuff. Now it's a medical complex, medical pharmaceutical complex. So a lot of this information that we're given as to what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat, and what's normal, what's not normal, it's all based on, making money, et cetera, and this kind of misinformation is given still in the schools. I remember taking a microbiology course, and I have a professor, PhD from Stanford, and he's talking about HIV, AIDS, and a green monkey. And I'm like, now, there's no way in heck that this man with this kind of education, this kind of background, believes that crap, okay? We're past the green monkey lie, okay? But yet nobody, of course, nobody wants to have that impact on their grade, or they don't want to, be, because, it's not just what you do in the test. Sometimes you also have labs and other projects and stuff that you do that impact on your grade. So nobody says anything, and I knew that, like, nobody was buying. I'm like, I couldn't believe this guy was sitting up here and just telling us this lie, So, this misinformation that you get in the university, in the schools, some people actually, when they become, you're already indoctrinated. You've already been through the gauntlet of this is how we practice, okay? So you got to be a team player. And getting back to, like, doctors, like somebody was saying, I think it was S-Guy was talking about, how you need to do the research before you go into the hospitals and all that kind of stuff, and be prepared to ask questions. There's stuff that you can download online about, questions that you should ask, so you can already kind of like go in prepared. And it always helps to have a doctor, even if you just, pay him minimally or whatever, to have a doctor that you can say, oh, this is my primary physician, so that person can kind of also speak for you, because it's overwhelming, when you're ill, it's overwhelming, no matter how intellectual you may be or prepared. Somebody tells you, you're sick or you're dying, or, this is going to cost you $2,000, or your mom just passed out. All your intellectualism, you can be very well trained, just like kind of goes out to the window, and it's like you just like deflated like a balloon. So it helps to be prepared ahead of time, and to have a physician and say, well, okay, well, can you talk to Dr. So-and-so because he's my primary or whatever. That keeps them off of you a little bit.
There's just had lots of little interesting tidbits all throughout the book. Like it's pretty long, but it is an interesting one. I could see where Dr. Welsing would get a kick out of, or at least I think she might get a kick out of many of the things in the book. The last one I'll read. This is on page 193, just talking about these doctors and people that made this acceptable for everybody to be participating in this cannibalism and consumption of human flesh and blood and the whole nine, human fat. This is on 193. Thomas Willis, a modern general practitioner who prescribed chocolate, would perhaps not be entirely unpopular and could, of course, respond to any critics that cocoa is a source of magnesium. In the 1660s, one doctor recommended for apoplexy a chocolate mixture which was also rich in calcium. It contained the powder of the root of the male peony mixed with human skull, ambergris, and musk. To this one should add of the kernels of cocoa nuts 1 pound, and of sugar what will suffice, and of this make chocolate, taking half an ounce or 6 drams every morning, in a draught of the decoction of sage or of the flowers of peony. It was by no means unknown for the then novel import chocolata to be prescribed by eminent doctors. While this recipe seems slightly unusual, it had considerable authority behind it. The doctor in question was Thomas Willis, now remembered particularly as a pioneer of brain research in a time when this organ was strikingly little known and underappreciated. The father of neuroscience was also a vigorous anatomist, and by 16 67, the highest paid man in Oxford. I just thought that was a interesting little Dr. Welsing moment as well, with the chocolate being added in with this consumption of fragments of the human skull that is supposed to cure apoplexy and these other ailments. But definitely right in line with what Dr. Welsing says, this compensating for something that is missing, whites being incomplete, and it even going back to melanin with chocolate and human flesh being consumed to compensate for whatever is perceived to be missing, this sense of inferiority. Hope it was constructive. As I said, we had a black female listener in the UK who reminded me of this text, where she was familiar with it. I hope folks got some constructive information about it. Hopefully we did not add to confusion. If you want the article that I mentioned that Dr. Sugg authored, should be on the Facebook page. If you can't access it, didn't access it, whatever the case may be, you can drop me an email and I can shoot it to you. The article, again, is titled "The Trade in Human Organs, Return of the Body Snatchers." In my opinion, he is minimizing this practice, which just, in my view, it's widespread, undeniable, but feel free to check it out. Come to your own conclusions. I'd recommend getting this book as well. Like I said, it is pretty chunky. It's about 1,000 pages, but read at your own leisure. You don't have to finish it in a day or a week or even a month. You can take your time and just peruse at your will. We should be back on Friday. We are concluding a nice follow-up, Henrietta Lacks, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, authored by Rebecca Skloot, Racist Suspect. We should also be here on Saturday for the compensatory call-in. And then Monday, we will be back to the UK. We should have a black female author. She is a flight attendant, and she wrote about her experiences with racism, flying all over the world, and how she was treated by white passengers, black passengers, problems with her having natural hair, the whole nine. But she should be here on Monday. That'll also be much earlier than we normally are on because of the time difference, her being in the UK. But yeah, we should be broadcasting pretty regularly as 2015 comes to a close. Thanks for the folks who were able to tune in early.
Can you tell us where you got the book from? I'm sorry. Again, I'm sorry.
This book, The Mummies, Cannibals, and Vampires?
Yeah, you said it was hard to get.
No. I don't know if it's hard. I just said it was long. I don't think it's particularly hard to get. I just think it's long. Okay. It's not. I don't think you'll have too much difficulty finding it at all. It's just long. But yeah, it's Mummies, Cannibals, and Vampires. Dr. Robert Sugg, and apparently it was popular enough that they're doing a follow-up edition. So you should probably be able to nab this at your local library. That would be my guess. I don't think it's very difficult at all, particularly if you're around anywhere where they have like a major university or college. I think you'll have an easy time getting your hands on it.
Oh, thanks.
If you get confused or lost along the way, let me know and see if we can help you out if you are having difficulty, but I don't think it'll be tough to find. But yeah, we should be back Friday, Saturday, Monday. Looks like we might be on every day next week, all the way through Sunday. So just stay tuned. We should be normal program time, except for next Monday. We have our black female on from the UK. But other than that, normal program time. If you get confused, have questions, feel free. Drop an email, untiljustice@gmail.com, untiljustice@gmail.com. Let me know if you have difficulties finding the book or the article or whatever else you're trying to get your hands on. We are fundraising for the close of 2015. Invest if you think the program is constructive. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Racism-notes.blogspot.com. Listener supported, counter racist radio. You'll see the PayPal button in the top right corner. If you are not feeling PayPal, drop me an email and we can get you a mailing address if you would like to support the broadcast. Super appreciative for everyone who has contributed down through the years. Hope it has been worthy of your time and energy. We will make every effort to continue offering constructive information. Again, if it is confusing, if it's not helping out, invest your time elsewhere. We have too many problems to be wasting time if you're not getting helpful, constructive information from the cows. We will be back in about 48 hours, unless something unforeseen happens. Thanks all for tuning in. Sobriety would be best under conditions of war. Sobriety would be best under conditions of war. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of racism. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Help us manifest maximum levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, and each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Context of white supremacy signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
I'm a victim, brother.
No problem. You're a victim.
Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning.
Shut up.
The man has programmed my condition. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.